All right, welcome to the fourth episode of my podcast with yours truly, William Snyder, and AKA the Yeti. And I have my guest today, Ben Monat. All right,
Love
Ben, thank you for coming on.
Hey, my pleasure, William. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yes, and also, my goal is I want to have like at least 100 episodes, and this is only episode 4, so you'll be viewed as one of the OGs of my podcast.
I love it. I love it. And Adam Vinatieri, wasn't his number 4 too with the Patriots?
Yes, well, actually, let me look that up right now. He,
Yeah.
yes, as Barack Obama said, when the Patriots won their 4th Super Bowl after not winning it for 10 years, when they were at the Obama's White House, first time they visited the White House when Obama was president. It was funny, actually. Obama said, I had 12 jokes for today, but I was afraid 11 out of 12 of them would fall flat.
That's great.
And he also he said Vinatieri was number 4 with the Colts, and I believe he was number 4 with the Patriots as well. So yeah, you can be you're Adam Vinatieri.
I love it. I love it. Well, hopefully, maybe one day I could be half as clutch as he's been for so many teams.
Yeah, he's Adam Vinatieri was number 4, and so actually speaking of Adam Vinatieri, did you know that when I was in 5th grade, Adam Vinatieri came to my school, the Jordan Jackson Elementary School, and it was an anti-bullying assembly. Like the teachers played a skit, and then Adam Vinatieri would ask the audience like what they saw in the skit and how and what are some good ways to deter bullying.
That is fantastic. I didn't know that he came. I mean, that must have made quite a profound impact. 'Cause I remember too, because where you and I met, we met in 2010 at UMass Amherst. We were both students, and I think that's one thing I always remember about you is that you're a great guy, and you always want to make sure that you're standing up for people. Maybe if they had an issue expressing themselves or they didn't have that sense of confidence, I remember that was something you were always really big on to make sure that everyone had a voice.
Absolutely, thank you. And yes, I've always fought for all voices to be heard, and I always will. But yeah, Adam Vinatieri. This was in the 2000. This was after the 2000 Patriots season. That was Belichick's first year in New England, and it was Tom Brady's first year. But Tom Brady was the backup quarterback, and he only appeared once. He went 1 for 3 for 6 yards against the Detroit Lions.
Wow.
Yeah, but I mean, it was Drew Bledsoe's team, and then Vinatieri was. People liked Vinatieri. Like I remember there was one guy, one of my fellow students who was absent. The next day, he was so disappointed that he didn't get to see Adam Vinatieri. But Adam Vinatieri actually, so it was the way we got him in here. One of the husbands of one of the school staff was one of the Patriots coaches. He was like a position coach, and they sent out an autograph of. They gave every student an autograph, a copied autograph of Adam Vinatieri, this coach, and John Moretti, who was the superintendent of schools.
No way. That's really cool. I like that.
Yeah. But this is before Vinatieri made that clutch kick in February 2002 to wrap up the 01 season.
Absolutely. Well, and I think you're right because, the Patriots went to the Super Bowl in 96, and then that was under Parcells, right? And then Pete Carroll, before he had the Seahawks fame, he was with the Patriots from 97 to 99.
Yep.
And then Belichick, he came in, he was 5-11 his first year. So yeah, that makes sense. It's like someone like a Vinatieri who'd been to a Super Bowl, is clearly someone very active in the local community, doing reach out to kids. Yeah, it's that's awesome that you had a chance that he came to your school in the 5th grade.
Yeah. And do you remember? So Vinatieri actually had 2 clutch kicks: the 01 Super Bowl. And then in 03, I remember the 03 season, that's when the Patriots went 14-2. That was, at that point, they set a franchise record for most wins. because prior to that, the best they had done in a season was go 11-5, but they went 14-2. And Vinatieri, our defense was lights out that year. We had Teddy Bruschi, Mike Vrabel, Roman Pfeiffer, Ted Johnson, Richard Seymour. Ted Washington was out for a lot of the year, but when he was in there, he was a beast. And we had Ty Law, Rodney Harrison,
Yep.
Eugene Wilson, who stepped up and after Lawyer Malloy got cut. Eugene Wilson came in there. He was a solid rookie free safety. And then they had Tyrone Poole as the other cornerback. And then that was Asante Samuel's rookie year. He also got in there quite a bit.
Wow.
And like it was Jarvis Green.
Oh yeah, Jarvis Green on the defensive line, I believe.
Yeah, that defense was legendary, and we gave up the fewest points in the league. Wow. And I remember, if I can remember correctly, did you ever watch Around the Horn?
I used to, on ESPN.
Yeah, I started watching it again recently. It's actually going off. 2025 is the last year it's going to be on.
Wow, that is the end of an era for sports commentating.
Yeah, but I remember back in the day, you know Woody Page?
Sure. Yeah.
I love him. He's quite a fun. He's always been really fun to watch on Around the Horn.
Yeah.
I remember he actually predicted the Titans would upset the Patriots in that divisional round game when it was freezing. It was like 0 degrees.
Oh yeah.
Wow. But he didn't get. I mean, Tony Reale disagreed with them. And the other host disagreed with them. But then after the Patriots beat the Titans, I remember the powerhouse offensive Colts were coming in. But then Woody Page completely changed his mind about the Patriots. He's like, this team has Rodney Harrison. They have Teddy Bruschi. They have Willie McGinnis. This is the best defense of all time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think one of the things I think about those defense is the way they would communicate on the field. I remember just watching some of those games, and then even afterwards, there was like the Super Bowl recap. They would go game by game, and what I really stuck out to me, I think, was a lot of the body language and nonverbal gestures that you would see. Defensive players motioning to each other, like when they were playing zone, kind of making sure people knew where they were supposed to be. And it was really, I think, a very selfless team. Players were, we look back now, we've got head coaches, who are players there. We've got Hall of Famers. We've got Tom Brady in his prime, on the offense, Deion Branch, Troy Brown, and many others, David Givens. And just, I think that they said, hey, you know what, we are going to go set out. We have a goal that we want to accomplish. And, one thing to remember, too, because to your point, Lawyer Malloy, the all-star safety, got traded right before the season to the Buffalo Bills, and the Buffalo Bills beat them 31-0. Just a real quick trivia, the last game of the season, they played the Bills again. Do you remember the score of that game?
31-0. We reversed it.
Absolutely. And so I thought that was kind of like not a fairy tale ending, but very apropos, the way it started, and then to kind of turn it around to end it going the exact same score.
Yeah. And it was like everyone thought it was the end when we got blown out 31-0, but against Buffalo. But then we turned it around immediately. I mean, I remember week 2 of that year we beat the Eagles, and the Eagles were a really good team that went to the conference championship that year.
Right.
And then do you remember the only other loss we had that year?
Wow, that's if I had to guess, I would guess Miami.
It actually wasn't.
Really?
So we beat the Eagles in week 2. We beat the Jets in week 3. It was actually against the Redskins, back when they used to be the Washington Redskins.
Wow.
And it was like, I remember we could have kicked a field goal, but we went for it on 4th down and missed, and we lost like 20-17. And I remember the next day at school, the kids in the class were like, Vinatieri could have kicked that. But hey, Vinatieri. Yeah. But I remember I've watched all the documentaries about that season, and the Patriots players said it was that game they knew they should have won that. They used that as motivation for the rest of the season, and that's what they won all out.
Wow. You know what? That makes sense. I think one thing to the Patriots, Belichick and Brady were so good about is they would find those areas of motivation Like I remember too, back in the day when it was more about the newspaper clippings, right? They would have a whole bulletin board where, they would try to find things where other, players, coaches, newspapers were trying to talk down to the Patriots. And I think those other papers and coaches and players quickly learned, don't do that, because the Patriots would have this way, they would really rally around that message. And even let's say if it was a teammate that maybe didn't get as much playing time, I feel like they would really rally around that teammate and say, whether you're Tom Brady or the 53rd man to make the roster, you are part of the New England Patriot team.
Yes. And there was like another thing about the '03 team is we only had 3 Pro Bowlers. Like you think a lot of sometimes teams like powerhouse teams have like 10 Pro Bowlers, and like people were saying, should we have had more? Originally, it was just 2. It was Richard Seymour and Ty Law, but then Willie McGinnis got added on there to make it 3. But like I remember Rodney Harrison was like he should have been in the Pro Bowl, but he was on the All Pro team. The All Pro team is really where more of an award because that's like the coaches in the league making the selection. Like Pro Bowl, remember the fans just at least I think they still do it. Like the fans vote, so it's like I mean it just sounded like people didn't like the Patriots, so they didn't vote for like Rodney Harrison or Teddy Bruschi at least that year. And then Brady also did not make the Pro Bowl that year. He still had 3,620 passing yards and 23 passing touchdowns, but it was Peyton Manning, Steve McNair, and Trent Green who got
Trent
the
Green
Pro Bowl nods.
from KC. Wow. I think that's one thing too. I think a great lesson from the Patriots is just how efficient they were. They and I think that's a great point because those stats with Brady, nowadays are like, oh my gosh, throwing for under 4,000 yards and only 23 touchdowns. But those seasons, he actually still threw for what maybe 10 to 12 interceptions, if I remember. But there's a stat I remember hearing. It's something like if you throw one interception in an NFL game, that doesn't really affect the score. It's what happens when you throw 2, 3, 4 interceptions. And I think, we talk about that season when they played the Colts at home in the snow. And was that the year that they beat them 20-3?
That was the following year that when
Oh,
they won their
four.
3rd Super Bowl in 4 years. Yes,
Okay.
I remember that game. People thought the Colts were going to beat us in that divisional round, and we completely. I mean, that was actually in '03 and '04 in the regular season games, we beat the Colts, but the Manning led offense put up 34 points and 24 points respectively. And then in the '03 conference championship, we picked Manning off 4 times. And then in the '04 conference championship, the Colts only put up 3 points. We completely they came to the freezing cold Gillette Stadium, and we just it was lights. Our defense was lights out.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it might have been a different year, but I remember too, like, the Colts, they had won a bunch of games, so they rested Manning for a while, and I think his first game back in one of those years was in the cold New England, and I think some of the commentary was saying, the Patriots, they were really kind of fighting for every game, so because of that, they had that hunger to them. And I think that was, when I was, gosh, 13 years old, 14 years old. I never played sports. I didn't have the coordination to do so. But no, I really kind of liked, for me, I was more of a musician. I like playing the guitar. And just kind of the thing is sometimes, you kind of have to keep practicing and you feel like, am I really getting better at something? But seeing how the Patriots, they're like, hey, we're going to give it our all, not only on Sundays, but I remember this great quote, William, from Bill Belichick, who essentially said, you know what? He said, the most important time of the year are the summer workouts. Because he says, if we can have a good day of practice every day in the summer workouts when other teams weren't taking it as well, he always found that he had his best teams that played well over the summer. Just, they had that sense of seriousness. They would go through the drills, they would introduce new plays. And I always found that, and that's kind of something that I've taken with me kind of through life is what are those periods in our life where quote unquote it's the summer practices where maybe others are taking a little more of a lackadaisical approach, but we can really step up to the plate and strive for excellence, and then when it really matters, then we'll be really all set and ready for success.
Yeah, and that's why not only does That's all part of the Patriot way. And not only does it apply to the NFL or to football, but to all sports and to all activities, as you said. Your music, or I mean, if it's drawing, if it's like cooking or baking, like if you apply that mindset, you'll only get better, and like you'll be really like it's that extra work that you do in your spare time that will give you the edge if like you're a baker and you go into that baking contest. And
Absolutely.
hey, I still have not met anyone else who can play Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre's The Next Episode on the acoustic guitar.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I think too, because we're also talking a little bit how we met each other. I think another thing, like you always have a deep appreciation about music. And I think one thing that you actually kind of helped me to realize is it really makes sense. You want to have a wide range of musical influences. Even let's say hearing a pop song on the radio. I think there's so much you can learn from listening to today's current music, because it's like what makes a song catchy, and just kind of expanding that out to say is that sometimes it makes sense to, like, okay, if you're interested in something and there's another area or maybe you don't know that much about, just kind of pay attention to it, see what comes from it. So I remember too, like, I think like you really like rap music, and like you had raps and stuff like that you would write, so always just being very creative.
Yeah, and I've always had a lot of creative analogies. I'll take this time so let's talk about the creative analogy I made back when I was in 8th grade, learning about the American Revolution in depth,
I love it.
and also because that coincided with the Patriots' second Super Bowl win.
Perfect.
And okay, so in the American Revolution, we're learning all about the great General George Washington, and I made the comparison that George Washington's mindset in the American Revolution and how he guided the Continental Army was analogous to how Bill Belichick was coaching the New England Patriots. And I mean, and there's so many. Before I begin, first off, I think it's the Continental Patriots were fighting for their independence, and our New England Patriots are named after them. So it's a very fitting analogy. And football and like military combat and like battlefield history, I think are analogous. Like, for example, I remember my freshman year American politics professor, who actually he was on the second podcast with me. It
Very
was
cool.
spring 2009. We were at Franklin Dining Hall. I was eating. He comes in, he sits down, and we start talking. And we're talking about football. And he said, like, we were talking about how it's more popular here than in Europe. And he described it. He's like, it's a very militaristic sport. Like,
Yeah.
then again, I mean, rugby is a very militaristic sport. Rugby is very similar, and they play rugby over in Europe. But Bill Belichick is actually a big history buff. He loves like ancient history, like and he's given a lot of ancient history analogies when he brings the team in for team meetings, like to start off the week. Also, did you know that when at the Patriots visit to the Obama White House in April 2015, Obama said Malcolm Butler can now join Adam Vinatieri as always being able to get free drinks to any bar they go to in New England.
I know I didn't hear that, but wow, I mean, what a play. I mean, because I remember watching that Super Bowl vividly. I'm sure you do too, with one of the greatest running backs, easily of the last 20, 30 years, maybe even of all time, Marshawn Lynch, who, just for comparison, right, he was playing the Saints in another game, ran 77 yards through 9 defenders. No one could tackle him. I don't know if it was that season or another time, but
Yep.
yeah, they were just running and running. And what was actually interesting, well, the statistic that I heard, so what happened was it was first down 1 yard away. They threw the ball. That's when Malcolm Butler intercepted it. But I believe NFL teams on the 1 yard line had tried over 60 attempts of throwing the ball, and it had never been intercepted that entire season.
Yeah. And it's also like maybe they were trying to fool the Patriots because the equally I argue that a very impressive play was when the Seahawks got it down to the 5-yard line and they ran the ball to Lynch then.
Yeah.
And we prevented, most teams would have given up a 5-yard rushing touchdown, but we stopped Lynch at the 1-yard line. Like, we prevented Lynch from getting a 5-yard rushing touchdown. So I mean, maybe it was to try to fool us. Like, they think, oh, we're obviously going to run the ball to Lynch, so let's do a quick pass. But the Patriots, they've been preparing that, running that defensive play all year. They knew how to defend 1-yard stands. Did you ever hear my Pat's Colors rap that I did at the time? I released it the day before that Super Bowl. And it goes alongside to Wiz Khalifa's Black and Yellow. And then in the third verse, I said,
I remember this.
Gaining yards by the grand, executing goal line stands.
Yes.
And I was like, because, goal line stands are awesome. And it's like that regular season today game against the Colts. I actually saw on Twitter, today's the anniversary, or at least close to the anniversary. I think it's probably the anniversary of 21-year anniversary of when the Pats had that 1-yard stand against the Colts in the 03 regular season and they held on to win 38-34. So I was like, I had no, I just knew that a 1-yard stand was highly possible, especially in a close game, and we got that 1-yard stand.
Yeah.
So it's like my lyric foreshadowed the 1-yard stand with Butler getting that interception. We executed a goal line stand.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think to me, one line stands, 1-yard stands are one of the best moments in sports, just because everyone really coming together. It's like, hey, that's the last line. There can be no more. And Edgerrin James, to your point, who was on the Colts, that's another Hall of Fame running back. It was something about the Colts where they won plenty of games, and I know they ended up winning that Super Bowl. Objectively, really happy for them. But there was just something about, maybe overcoming adversity, not being on every single week ESPN, touting your team and saying, oh, you're the latest and greatest, where I think the Patriots really had this underdog mentality and they were fighting really hard. And so I think sometimes, to your point, when it really push came to shove, I guess pun intended, that the Patriots were able to get those key stops and key wins as well.
Yeah. But so back to the analogy I had. Well, also another thing about Bill Belichick is, so he's a big history buff. There's an ancient Chinese general that he actually cited. I can't believe I can't remember what it is right now. I was Googling it, but I remember if you ever watch A Football Life, Bill Belichick, the cameras followed Belichick for the 09 regular season for the Pats. And
Okay.
he said a quote from one of the Chinese generals to the entire team. So
I think it was Sun Tzu. Was it
Sun Tzu? Yes.
The Art of War. Yep.
Yeah. So he's a big. So Belichick is a big ancient history buff, an ancient combat buff. Because back then, keep in mind, without gunpowder, the whole strategy of winning a battle was very different. I mean, they had cannons with flames being shot and stuff, but he's I'm sure Belichick has used his studying of ancient military history and applied it to his coaching.
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the I haven't read Art of War, but I think one of the lines is the best defense is to go on offense. Kind of
Yes.
like the art of the surprise. And I think to your point, William, the art of the surprise, that was a big, principle in Sun Tzu's Art of War. And that was the thing is, some of the trick plays, but also I think some of the disguises for the defense that Belichick had his defense do. Especially it was beautiful to see against rookie quarterbacks. They would just really disguise it all up and, they'd have the other team scratching their head.
Yes. And that brings me to my analogy I made. So I said when the 13 colonies were fighting for their independence, when the full British Army comes in 1776, the Continental Army and the militia forces fighting for independence were outnumbered and outgunned and did not have the supplies that the British had, but they had George Washington in command. I think that's analogous to how when Belichick took over in 2000, there was a lot of holes on the roster, but they had they had their guy. Because remember, back in Belichick was actually the assistant head coach on the '96 team that went um, to the Super Bowl
Right.
but lost to the Packers. And they actually wanted Belichick right then and there, but he stuck with Parcells, so that's why they got Pete Carroll. But then
Oh,
when Pete Carroll got fired in '99 after having going from 10-6, 9-7 to 8-8, they're like we got to get Belichick this time around, and they did.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
23 years of it's a pretty good coaching coaching record. So.
24, 2000, 2023. That's
Yeah,
24
you're right.
seasons.
You're right. You got to count the 2000 season. Yep, absolutely.
And but once again, they had a football genius in Belichick. The way the Continental Army had Washington, a once in a generation military genius. Did you know that George Washington is the only general that's ever been given 6 stars?
No, I did not know that.
And he is the only general that will ever be allowed to be given 6 stars.
Wow,
And
wow.
but they also like I feel like the way Washington was able to turn things around and get his command played a key role in getting the American Patriots to win the war is analogous to how Belichick turned around the Pats. Like his first year he goes 5-11, but then the next year they go 11-5 and win the Super Bowl. I mean, even in that 0-1 season, they started out 0-2 and 1-3 and 3-4. Like they didn't look like a Super Bowl team early on, but that really changed. And Belichick built was key in building the team into a team that won 3 Super Bowls in 4 seasons in the early 2000s, and then won 3 more. Has had 19 straight seasons of winning records, and um, had three Super Bowl wins in 5 seasons in the 2010s. But like it's also like looking at how they did it, and I mean, Washington. It's like you ever learned about? I'm sure you learned about it. Do you remember learning about the winter at Valley Forge?
Yeah, I think what's funny. I believe I might have visited Valley Forge, but would you mind actually just refreshing my memory about that history?
Yeah, sure. Hold on just one second.
Yeah.
Um, well, so in what the Continental Army in 1777 is they're tired. They or 1770. It was like I think it was both 76 and 77. The Continental Army's tired. Keep in mind, there's a lot of the army's mostly made up of like young 18, 19-year-old like kids. I mean, back then they were men, but like in today's world, they'd be kids. But back then they're 18, 19-year-old men who a lot of them want to go home. Like the Continental Army is struggling to pay everybody to stay. And they're at Valley Forge where, they're doing everything they can to stay warm, but it's freezing cold. And they're low on food. And it's really like not a good situation to be in. But Washington had um, the Thomas Paine. So Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, but he also wrote The Crisis. And in The Crisis, he said, "This is a time that tries men's souls." And he had that read to everybody in the Continental Army. And the vast majority of the army went from wanting to quit towards stepping up and staying and pushing through the winter and keeping up the fight.
Wow.
And keep in mind, Washington was constantly like he had to like he couldn't beat the Brit like he couldn't beat the British with what he had in the battles of Long Island, in the battles of New York. But when he switched up tactics, he's like, you know what, we have to fight a different way. And when he did that, he snuck up on the Hessians and he captured most of the Hessians.
Okay.
And then he was also victorious at the Battle of Princeton. So
Okay.
like the battles of Trenton, battles of Princeton, like using different tactics.
Yeah.
And I think it's similar to how in the 03 season, after the Pats got blown out by the Bills, Belichick said, like, listen, the league is loaded with like high-powered offenses and defenses and all these great teams. Like we can't just say it's too hard. Like if we
Yeah.
do that, we're going to go 5-11. But like we just got to buckle up and say we got to find a way to win no matter what. And the Pats had so many injuries that year. Like remember Roosevelt Colvin got signed. Everyone was excited by him, but he broke his hip in week 2.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember.
Oh, that was awful. And like there was just we actually had the most amount of injuries of all teams that year, but we always had the next man up mentality, and we won no matter what. So I think that's my my second major similarity. But then my favorite similarity is once again we're comparing football to military combat. And I mean, Washington used so much military intelligence to outsmart the British. Like he sneaks up on the Hessians on Christmas Eve, and then he keeps the campfires running to so that General Cornwallis doesn't General Cornwallis's troops think they're by the campfire. They're going to attack in the morning, but when they go there, they're already gone. He basically they left one by one, and he had people stay behind to keep the fire going until like the last person who left still had the fire going. So it made the British think they were there, but when they got there, they were gone.
Wow. So
Yeah.
yeah, so really kind of create that perception that that everything was going well for Cornwallis to attack in the morning. Meanwhile, they had done their sneak attack. Wow, that's great to know.
And I mean, earlier in the war, when he had they took the cannons and put them up on Dorchester Heights, pointed them at Boston, causing the British to evacuate. So like he captured Boston from General Howe, without having to fire a shot. And I think it really, I've argued to people that if in some alternative history where the British did hang on to like the colonies, Boston would have been still independent. Like there'd be pockets of the American colonies where the colonists would be still resisting and would still maybe try to govern. Like Boston would have been its own independent like area of Britain for quite some time. If for some reason the British had been able to win the revolution. And I think that's analogous to how, and I remember sharing this with my classmates at the time, how Belichick is using all his defensive schemes to shut down like high-powered offenses. Like Manning, for example, Steve McNair and Peyton Manning were co-MVP that year, but he used the defenses to shut both of them down. And then he also used to shut down Kurt Warner 2 years prior, who was also an MVP. And like Manning was like, you talk about people, you mentioned earlier in this episode how our defensive players were always like, giving each other signs on the field. Like Manning that year, I remember specifically was like, talking to this offensive lineman, then he was talking to that tight end, and he was like doing all the stuff at the line of scrimmage, and then the defenses were standing there like WTF, and then he would bomb it away for a touchdown. When Manning was doing that in the conference championship, the Patriots defense was right on top of him, and we got 4 picks on him. And then I still remember Teddy Bruschi got injured in the conference championship, but he wouldn't. Belichick would not indicate Bruschi's status, so that already got inside the minds of the Carolina Panthers.
I remember. Sorry to interrupt. I remember at one point, I think the NFL actually fined him because there's a player he listed as like doubtful until the day before, and then they were playing. Like, all right, you got to give us a little better, results on the injury report. So I'm sorry, please.
Yes. And then so to summarize, put all that in a nutshell, Washington. It is analogous to how Washington used military intelligence to shut down. To outsmart General Howe, General Cornwallis, and the Hessians. It's similar to how Bill Belichick has used football intelligence to shut down Steve McNair, Peyton Manning, and Kurt Warner, and others like them.
Yeah, I agree. Doing a little bit of thinking outside the box, and especially if other people haven't thought of it yet, it can be very surprising and could be just what it needs to do to kind of turn the tide and get that successful result that they were looking for.
I had a poster made last year because last year I taught my kids about the American Revolution, and I'm teaching about it this year. And it's I had a poster made, It's Washington and Belichick side by side, and I had it says intelligence, perseverance, determination, success.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Um, and then Belichick also, he's kind of given he's not he doesn't really share his opinion very often, but at the White House in 2015, he wore an Armenian pin,
Yes. Yep.
right, to acknowledge the Armenian genocide that occurred at the end of World War One, which um, um, the American like Congress and no Congress or president has ever officially acknowledged that happened. So it's like he
Yeah.
supports acknowledging that happened.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of, people acknowledging, atrocities, President Biden recently acknowledged the 150-year terrible policy of the aborted boarding schools for Native Americans. What's actually really interesting, William, is I'm actually reading a great book all about the Navajo code talkers from World War II. A few years back, actually, I went to Arizona, did some of the national parks, and a gentleman, Chester Nez, who was one of the code talkers, sat down with this woman and did hours and hours of oral history. And so she took it and wrote it all down. And one of the things he says is he talks about going to those boarding schools where, the teachers definitely use some rough, approaches, let's say, to kind of get them to do what they wanted. And, one of the things they said is no speaking Navajo, you can only speak English. And, he's like, hey, that was not a good situation at the boarding school. But when he had to go into the Marines, he was saying is like that was a little bit of a silver lining having to get his English so good. But, and at the same time, too, kind of behind the teachers' backs, they would still be practicing their Navajo, make sure that they had the language and culture all together. So I find it really interesting, William, like how, different people kind of use their experiences. Some people might say, woe is to me. It's been a really tough situation. And certainly, some people have, they're not placed in a good situation. But like, how do those people, also grow from the adversity? And I think some of those people who can kind of flip it on its head, so to say, have some of the biggest successes, and they're able to do things that people who have not been through that adversity aren't able to do.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the speaking of combat, the Native Americans. I mean, the big disadvantage to them was they didn't have gunpowder when the Europeans arrived,
Right.
but they still found ways to really fight back against the Europeans. There was a lot of military expertise among the Native Americans. Um, but I think that's a good segue to talking about Ted Kennedy and John Kerry.
I love it. Let's do it.
Yeah. So I remember I read True Compass, which in my parents' living room. It's always been a book that's been on the shelf, and I just had never gotten around to reading it. But then I remember my mom put it in my room because she's like, you like to. She's like, you'd probably want to read this. And I was like, yeah, definitely. And I sat down and read it in like I think in less than a month, and I really like. My mom read it like back in 2009, 2010 when it first came out. And my mom
Yep.
had told me some stories about from it, but I really this was in spring 2018. This is before, so this is when I'm upset that Trump is in office, and this is before the Democrats had took back the House in 2018, and before the Democrats really um, got elected to a lot of positions to put up in opposition to Trump. And I was concerned. I was upset that Trump was removing the U.S. from a lot of global, um, treaties and global agreements. And I was concerned about the how he was his administration was perpetuating the rich are getting richer and everybody else is getting poorer. And but when I read Ted Kennedy's book, it really made me feel better about that. There were better times ahead. Do you remember? And you read it shortly after that. What did you feel? What kind of feeling did it give you?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I really kind of took from the book, and I still institute it till this day, is actually a story that Ted Kennedy told, I think when he was 3 years old, and he had a birthday party at his house. And I guess he had to go upstairs for something, and he heard, I guess, one of his, friends at the time, sobbing, calling his mother, saying, "Pick me up. This isn't a good party. I'm not having fun." And, Ted Kennedy, 3 years old, ran to his dad and said, "Dad, my friend's not having a good time. I wish he was." And the advice that dad said, "Son, if you ever hear a conversation that's not intended for you, do not listen in." And Ted says actually that really helped him to become, I think, one of the most, if not, the most bipartisan senator in Congress, because he said, "I really learned how to compartmentalize." So, let's say if there was a fellow senator where, it was an issue that they completely could not see eye to eye on, Ted would always be listening to say, "Okay, what are the things that we can partner on?" And because of that, he was very well respected within the US Senate.
Yes, and that's why Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah, staunch Republican. He was the senator from 1964 all the way to 2018.
Wow.
And he passed away a couple of years ago, but he had a big portrait of Ted Kennedy in his office. Even though
Yeah.
because Ted Kennedy was strong Democrat, he was strong Republican, but he respected Ted Kennedy so much he had that portrait.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, that's one of the funny things is there really is a lot of bipartisanship. Like I read a statistic, like 95% of all bills that got passed, I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, had at least, one member from the other party. I mean, I was shocked to hear like Senator Warren has done deals with like Senator Hawley. You would think that they could not be more, far apart. I've seen, Ted Cruz, write to AOC on Twitter, "Hey, I like this idea." And it's just strange because there's people with such different contrasting visions of what democracy is, patriotism, what this country is, but they find a way to work together, I guess, on certain issues.
Yeah, I was teaching a civics and current events class in fall 2022, and we did an assignment where people were choosing bills that were currently being debated, like
Wow.
in Congress, and there was a lot of bipartisan bills, and it's really the news media only covers the stuff that's like where one party is trying to pass and the other opposes, but they're not really covering a lot of the other bipartisan stuff that's going on.
Absolutely. Actually, well, here's a question for you as an educator is, kind of given, like I think what you were just saying, how the media, they'll kind of, hand pick which cases they want to report out on, maybe because they think they're going to get the most amount of viewership. Is there some strategies or ways that, you talk about, the media and the influence, whether that's historically or today with your students in your civics classes?
I've always told them like read from as many sources as you can.
Yeah,
Also, look at the source too for any bias. Like if you're reading, like there are definitely sources that are going to be more biased than others toward one way or the other. But just read as many different angles as you can before you officially develop your position.
agreed.
Like if you can read 10 sources and all 10 sources are saying like or providing um, statistics or stories that are showing how something needs to be. If you got 10 sources like that, then it's safe to take that position. But just kind of read everything. Um, like for example, I think man, I know Fox News is far right, so I don't watch or read anything from them. I'm starting to get back into MSNBC, but like I used to not really watch MSNBC because it was the Fox News of the left.
Hmm.
And then I liked CNN, but CNN has a lot of like not only on their news but like on their websites they have editorials like arguing one way or the other. I think they're a mix of. I just felt like they got kind of they're a bit too sensational.
Yep, I
So
agree.
I like that's why I like to read from BBC News.
Sure.
And Axios is another one that started up like 5-10 years ago. That's
Hmm.
main purpose is to be nonpartisan, and Axios is a lot of good sources you can read from.
Yeah, no, I love what you're saying about having multiple sources, and I think, William, what you're doing here with having this podcast, I think is great. I'm totally not an expert or anything like that, but what I think we are seeing, especially with this last election, is more alternative sources of news and media are being consumed. Like, for example, there's a YouTube channel called the Midas Touch Network. They brand themselves as pro-democracy, so Democrats, independents, classic conservatives, people from all across political stripes that, really care about democracy. They actually found that within a 24-hour span, I believe they had more viewers than MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. Now, I hope that I didn't misquote that. So please, if you're listening, fact check me on that. And if I'm wrong, I stand corrected. But it's the whole enthusiasm, I think, behind people saying, you know what, we don't need the sensationalism. Just give it to us straight. And then to your point, then maybe what are some other sources, well, that maybe contrast that, or, that add some more context, make sure people are well informed.
Yes. And which brings me to, are you on Twitter at all? Have you ever been on Twitter? Well,
I'm smiling because I have done spurts on Twitter. The most active I was ever on Twitter was with the 2020 election. I have to tell you, I did get to have a few cool conversations with some celebrities. Ed Asner from the Mary Tyler Moore Show. I wrote to him. I said, Ed, I said, just curious, what would your character Lou Grant from the Mary Tyler Moore Show think of Twitter? He wrote back, he would have hated it. So yeah, so that was great. And also too, Richard Schiff from The West Wing. I got a response from him because there was a story, I believe it was a state, it might have been Idaho or Utah, where there was a Republican and Democrat both running for I think a governorship, and they had a commercial together saying, whichever way the election goes, we're going to respect our opponent. And Richard Schiff, had a great reaction. He goes, sometimes from the desert, a flower will grow. And he's like, that's wonderful. But my favorite repost I ever had was Dan Rather. Dan Rather, the legendary newsman, he wrote a book, and I bought it for my grandma, and I took a picture of me and my mom, and I posted it to him. And I guess he was kind of resharing out people's pictures who had bought his book. So I kind of got that mention, and he kind of put out the picture to a whole bunch of his followers. So, in short,
cool.
yeah, so I did that, and then the last one too was Suzanne McCain, Senator McCain's daughter from his first marriage, and this was when Arizona was really tight in 2020. So I reached out to her. I'm like, "Hey, Suzanne," I'm like, "What do you think about Arizona?" She's like, "It's definitely going blue."
All
So
right.
yeah, so I definitely had some fun. I found I was getting too sucked in. I needed to take that step back after the 2020 election.
Yeah. You know, it's, I mean, I feel like ever since Elon Musk took over, I still enjoy going on it, but I think the thing that Musk did was he started letting bots back on and like in like kind of fake news individuals back on, and it's been like, so now you're seeing a lot of the Russians were better able to get on there and spread like fake news about Kamala Harris and Democrats in order to boost Trump because they wanted Trump and they got him again.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the Department of Justice went after what? Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, a few other, of these, mainstream ex-commentators that pretty much saying that they were getting paid directly from Russia. And so, one website I kind of like is that Blue Sky.
Yes, I just got on there.
Yep, yep. And I've noticed a lot of pro-democracy advocates have now gone to Blue Sky. And you know what I did is I had a Twitter account also recently because I've gotten interested in the blockchain cryptocurrency space too as a hobby, just
Mm.
to learn a little more research about that. So I used to have an X account just because it was easy to kind of get the news, but just with kind of some of the latest developments, I've not been a fan of, Elon Musk threatening Alexander Vindman for the research he did in
Oh,
2019.
yeah, that was awful. He threatened the death penalty to Vindman. That was like way
Yeah.
uncalled for.
So I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna have an account, help his advertiser. So yeah, I'm not the biggest social media guy, but I do have a Blue Sky account. Just because, I think it's nice to be able to go on and maybe just see, like you were saying, Will, right? If you get to follow people who have worked in politics or seem to do the research, kind of hear what a few of them are saying and, perhaps use that to help inform a decision too.
Yeah. Okay. I'll be right back in like 2 minutes. I just gotta I just gotta
Take your
refill my
time.
water. I'll be right back. And then also when we do when I edit this, I'll edit this next this 1 2 minute out. But
Sounds great.
okay, I'll be right back.
Sounds great. You bet.
All right.
Hey.
Hey. Yeah. So we're talking about how Twitter is has turned gotten very chaotic since Musk took over, and Blue Sky is now where it's at.
I agree. I agree. And to me, what I find interesting is, social media I think can be, sure, of course, we all know it can be used for bad, but I think it could be used for good. It can give people a chance to connect with some good communities, other people explore hobbies, interests, look things up. So, yeah, I'm really hopeful to see what Blue Sky is going to, bring in. I'm really hoping that they'll have a lot of success, maybe especially over the next few months and years.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I wonder if Blue Sky is on the the stock market. It'd be worth a couple bucks right now, but like 4 years from now, it could be worth like hundreds of dollars.
That'd be interesting, like do they go public, right? Because I always find that fascinating for companies. Does it make sense for them to go public and have people be able to buy their stock? Do they stay a private company? Because didn't Twitter go public and then Musk took it private or something like that, I believe. But
Hmm. I'll be the actually we might have to edit this part of the video out when I go to editing, but
sure.
I just realized Blue Sky is actually the name of Walter White's product in Breaking Bad.
I like that. That's great.
Did the person who created Blue Sky take that into mind, or did that was are they naming their 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 social media site after Walter White's product, like,
Well,
or they're subtly connecting it to Walter White? I
you know, That that's great. Like some things, like one thing I like doing, I like checking out some of the local breweries. And actually I went to a terrific charity for Big Brother Big Sister, a few weeks ago, where they got a whole bunch of home brewers and local brewers to come bring their beer. But you see a lot of Star Wars themed beers, music themed beers, like the band Van Halen. They have the song called the Atomic Punk. So this brewery, they made like a sour beer, not my favorite, but the Atomic Funk, Phunk, with little kind of takeoff from that Van Halen. So it's always fun to see how businesses, or even something like a hobby like making some beer, they kind of take their names from one another.
Yeah, I just think if Walter White were a real person, I believe his end came in the year 2011. So
Oh,
like it's but you think like that he'd have a lot of he'd become that in that universe, the Breaking Bad universe. I'm sure he'd say um like a like a Che Guevara or like Al Capone type figure who like he did bad things, but people like love him for that.
yep.
And
Yep.
so like maybe in the Breaking Bad universe, it's like part of his aftermath is he's got a social media site named after him.
That would be great. I'd like that a lot.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah, but actually, speaking of Breaking Bad, my first semester senior year at UMass, I took American politics through film. Have you ever taken any courses called American politics through film?
No, but like I'd love to hear about it.
It's all about how every decade there's like films that come out that um, basically detail like they're basically reflections on what's going on in the world at the time or what's going on in the country. And there's some films that go against what the country's doing, and then there's other films that are very patriotic. Like for example, like Top Gun, for example, that came
Sure.
out in the '80s. Like that was a patriotic film to boost the U.S. as the true leaders of the world. Um, and then like films like Independence Day, like in the '90s, like that really, about like having an American president, like, be the hero, and like America leading is the most powerful country in the world. We're leading the world against the harvesters. Um, and like the course actually starts all the way in the beginning of the 1900s when we first had silent films and goes all the way up to the present. But I
Wow.
remember my professor asking us, like, okay, the movie Friends with Benefits. You know that movie with Justin Timberlake and Mila Kunis?
It sounds familiar. It sounds familiar. I don't know if I've seen it, but I feel like I've heard of it.
It came out in 2011. He's like, okay, is this a film that has any political connections? Why or why not? And
Okay.
you could say it does have some political connections because you could say it's an assault on on those who think that this nation is strictly founded on Judeo-Christian values uh, because Justin Timberlake's and Mila Kunis's characters are not following the wait until you have sex until you're married code because they're friends with benefits.
Right. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Um, so I mean, this is you can always this. It's amazing the amount of stuff, even stuff that was made that wasn't supposed to have any political like connections, can actually be made into like be tied into politics. And I've
Yeah.
always said, what's up?
I was gonna say, no, I believe that. You know what? Kind of something I think in a similar vein is how actually I judge the health of America is by what does comedy look like?
Uh
You
huh.
Like, I think when comics aren't afraid to crack jokes and it's very free flowing, but also too, I think the comedy is of a not a sophisticated nature, but it's a little smart. It's not just dropping a bunch of f bombs or being very crass, but like being a little witty. For example, like watching some of the old roasts that from the '60s and '70s on YouTube. I don't know if you've seen any of them, but really, the comedy was really about the timing, the inflection. And one thing I think I noticed under President Trump is that the comedy seemed to wane a little bit. For example, the show South Park, which I think that's a great barometer of how things are going. They ended up having one of their characters, Mr. Garrison, turn into, the Trump character, and
Yep.
just, it was art imitating, real life. And then, real life imitated the art. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's like, this is getting to be too much. But like, for example, under President Biden is like, I think the show has changed. They're doing more of these movies. Like I actually just watched one from 2023 the other night where they're kind of poking fun at the influencers and just kind of saying how these influencers are trying to get kids to, watch our channels, get endorsed by these sponsors and everything. And just, I felt like the comedy, it was still South Park, so they kind of still had their, juvenile jokes and everything, but it was a little more of a smarter, sophisticated brand of humor.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up actually, because I remember in the spring of 2009, my freshman year at UMass, there was a gentleman, Matt Glowacki, who he was born without legs, and his mission in life is he goes around showing people that he still can do great things, and like how he can, like for example, like there's like he visits schools, and like he's on the basketball court and he's like dribbling a basketball and like shooting hoops and stuff, like using his wheelchair. And and then he also talked about how, like, there's been times where he's been in public and like kids have walked up to him and are like, "Where are your legs?" And
Yep.
actually, Matt Kulacki had a lot of humor in his speech. It was at the student union. We went and saw him speak, and he said, when he told us a story about how kids have walked up to him and said, "What happened to your legs?" He said to the kid, "Well, one day I was a kid like you, and I walked up to another person who looked like me, and I said, 'Where are your legs?' And then poof, my legs were gone."
That's
And
great.
he said the kids would get terrified when he said that. He's
I
like,
like that. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that. I think that's something too culturally. Like, I come from the Jewish tradition in, comics, for example, like Don Rickles, who, is known as the Merchant of Venom. His thing is, take something that's painful and just go right after that. Take some things that are uncomfortable and poke fun at it. And actually, in the 1960s, there was about three, I think, psychiatrists. They sat down with him in front of a live audience to get to know him. And his whole thing was like, you know what? He's like, we are so similar across the board. He's like, I want to poke fun at the stereotypes and things that divide us a little bit because you know what? We can all poke fun at each other. And he's like, that's a bonding, uniting experience. So, to me, and to your point, I think, when people, use humor, so hey, really not so much different, like the speaker, Matt, at UMass in the spring of 2009, it sounds like, he really kind of, let down people's guard. And then maybe if they had other questions they wanted to ask of him, what it's like or the work he does, I think their brains too would be more, open and receptive to things that Matt might want to share with them as well too.
yeah, but his speech was, he's like, it was called Diversity Through Family Guy in South Park.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, and he's like, so I go around promoting diversity and showing people that, just because we have a disability doesn't mean we can't do great things, and doesn't mean that we can't be accepted. And he's like, and one of the ways I do this is by sharing talking about two very noble TV shows. And then he puts on the screen Family Guy and South Park. And everyone laughs like, how are these shows teach? How are these shows supposed to teach people about like diversity and social equality? But then he started putting on specific episodes, and like, despite the really slapstick and dark humor in the shows, there's actually a lot of episodes that I think do where the main message is like you got to be accepting,
Yeah.
and stuff. And it's really, it was I that was one of my favorite speeches I saw as an undergrad.
That's
Um,
yeah, that's great because you know what, I think that's one of the great things about the education system is, classes are great, but to be able to hear from speakers, comedians, musicians, researchers, and just to kind of get to hear their perspective, I think that, that education academia provides a really valuable resource to be able to do that.
yeah, I mean, like, I mean, I feel like both Family Guy and South Park have been very good about promoting like LGBT rights through
Yep.
their care. Like they've had some episodes, they've had specific episodes about that, but then also like through their characters and stuff. Um, and then like Do you still watch Family Guy?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I've been kind of keeping up with them, here and there. But yeah, I've seen a lot of the last few seasons.
Yeah, like I thought it was always very interesting and cool how they made Quagmire's father transgender.
Gotcha. I'm trying to think if I've seen that one. I'm going back in memory banks. Yeah, it's no, I don't know if I've seen that one, but no, I do really like that. It makes them relatable.
Yeah, the first when they introduced Quagmire's father, that first episode is kind of I actually it can be argued that it's actually kind of offensive, but like at the end of the
Gotcha.
episode, Quagmire throughout the episode, Quagmire's upset about this, but in the episode at the end of the episode, Quagmire accepts her for who she is. But
Yeah.
in later episodes where they've had her character, like I feel like it's more positive.
Yeah, and I think that's the type of smart comedy is sometimes you try something and maybe it's okay for the time, but you're like, you know what, this could be a little more inclusive and also probably a little funnier too, and I think that is really something that I kind of look for. Like you spoke about uh Ted Kennedy's True Compass. I know another book that you and I have read is John Kerry's
Yes.
autobiography. And one of the things I picked up from John Kerry too is he was really big as well as Ted was into the bipartisanship. Specifically sitting with people like John McCain. I think even he was fairly friendly with like Mitch McConnell in the 1980s, I believe. I think Mitch McConnell was kind of 10-year Kerry's junior in the Senate. But I think what they were both saying, and correct me if you've read differently, but really in 1994 when Speaker of the House, gosh, I'm completely blanking on his name.
Oh, Tip O'Neill.
Well, there was Tip. I know that Tip worked closely with John Kerry. Gosh, it's he was the Republican Speaker of the House, and its name
Or Newt
escapes.
Gingrich.
Thank you, Newt Gingrich. And I guess that was really the start of the divisiveness where it was made popular to kind of be with your own tribe.
Yep.
And I remember reading actually in both books that both senators said, unfortunately, that was kind of the beginning of the end when, the bipartisanship was not, really embraced as much as more of this, sensationalized, approach. And then you also have your 24-hour media news cycles really kind of starting to rev up too, which lined perfectly with this, new, I would say, more toxic and negative approach to governance.
Yeah, and if you read Bill Clinton's autobiography, My Life Part One, My Life Part Two, he actually just released. So My Life Part One goes from his birth all the way up until he gets elected president the first time. My Life Part Two is his presidency, and then he just released a third, a third book titled Citizen, where he picks up from when he left office all the way until the present.
Yeah.
Um, he mentions in part one, though, when he's on the governor, like back when he was governor of Arkansas, the Governors Association, there was the Democratic Governors Association, Republican Governors Association, then there's the Governors Association where all the governors would like work together to craft good plans for their states. But in the 90s, when it went from a majority of Democratic governors to a majority of Republican governors in 1994, that's when the Republicans turned the Governors Association into like we're only trying to elect Republican governors and we want to beat the Democrats and vice versa too. So like that's when it turned really divisive in the 90s.
Wow, that's really fascinating to learn. So, in addition to the Senate, for governors as well too, it sounds like that whole us versus them mentality became very pervasive, and it started really in that 1994 era. Yeah.
Yep. Like really, I mean, the Civil War didn't start in 1860. It started in 1820 with the Missouri Compromise. So I feel like
Yep.
the Civil War that's going on right now, it can really be traced to like maybe the origin you could say is the 1994 when the Republicans, I mean, Clinton took over during a recession, and we weren't out of the recession yet, so that's why the Republicans were able to take the House and the Senate and the majority of governorships. But Gingrich was not. He worked with Clinton in some stuff, but it wasn't like Tip O'Neill and Reagan.
Right, right, right. Who probably worked, yeah, hand in hand. I think, kind of fast forwarding to today, granted, I understand Democrats didn't have the results, wanted in 24, but in 2022, how President Biden, I think, really, increased the lead in the Senate by a seat. And
Hmm.
then also, too, there was supposed to be this huge red wave in the House of Representatives. And yes, the Republicans took the House, from what I understanding, through some gerrymandering, some redrawn districts, which they found unconstitutional. But I think what I really like President Biden is just because he's not perfect. I'm sure
Oh,
everyone has things they can point to because, and this is what I always say, William, is I say if you want to find a politician that's agrees with all your beliefs, then you should go run for office. And I know that that's something that you've done. You've taken the reins. But my thing with Biden just is to say is I think he realizes he's not perfect. He realizes that he might not be the smartest man in the room, but I think he kind of believes and trusts the people in the room. And I think he's like, you know what, I'll kind of quote unquote ride or die. He's like, I'll do the research and happy to push back, but like where I think that really kind of touched me as an American was when there was a fever pitch for President Biden to drop out, and Vice President Kamala Harris really had his back. She was going around to a lot of the media sources and say, no, she says, we need to believe in our president, Joseph Robinette Biden. And to me, it's like, I think that was such a nice story because, when it came time for President Biden, I guess he spoke with his family and just, it wasn't the right time for him to continue on advocating for a second term. He really struck me as someone to say, you know what, thank you so much, VP Harris, for always having my back. And he's like, hey, you know what, this is who I'm endorsing. The rest of the country, you can do whatever you want. But I think it was really that swift endorsement with a lot of conviction that I have to say it really motivated me. And I was fortunate to do some phone banking this last cycle in the Senate. I even did a little bit for Kamala and Tim. So yeah, just wanted to share that anecdote that
all
happened.
right. Yeah, let's we've been all of our talking has led to this point. I to where you're going to share what it was like to phone bank. You're phone banking for John Tester?
Yes, John Tester in Montana, and I also did a little bit of phone banking for Jackie Rosen in
Nice.
Nevada. Yep,
All
yep.
right. Tell us all about it. How was it going?
Absolutely. So I'll tell you, is I first got into phone banking. This was funny. I used to be a big fan of Andrew Yang in like 2019, 2020. And I always remember this. One of the influencers, she did a live stream where she did phone banking for Andrew Yang. And I never heard of this before, but I gave her a lot of credit picking up the phone, calling strangers, asking if they want to have a conversation. Well, I didn't start the phone banking then, but in 2020, there was a runoff in the Georgia Senate race with John Ossoff and then Reverend Warnock, who ended up winning. And I said, wow, this is going to really dictate the future of this country, with the Senate being able to pass legislation. So I want to make sure we had a democratic legislation. So my first experience doing phone banking was in 2020 for Ossoff and Warnock. Thankfully, they won. I did it for two losing campaigns, Andrew Yang's in 21 for New York City mayoral race, and then as well for the seat actually that JD Vance won against Tim Ryan in Ohio in 22. And then I didn't do anything for 23, but for 24, I got to take an awesome road trip for a cousin's wedding to Montana. And the more I learned about the makeup of the Senate, they saw that Senator John Tester, who was the only Democrat left in a state that used to be predominantly Democrat, even back in 2006 when he first won, is that seat was being contested by Republican Tim Sheehy. So what I actually did is I started making phone calls actually July 6th. So decently early on in the process. And what I like doing that is it gave me time to acclimate myself to making phone calls. So let me just pause there. I know that was a bunch of stuff I just said. So
Wow. Yeah, and it's like so now you have experience with like wins and losses. Like it was really big when we got when Ossoff and Warnock got elected.
yep.
Um, but it's like, and then with Andrew Yang, I mean, being elected mayor of New York. I mean, that's almost as big of. I mean, that's bigger than most governor positions. I mean, what's the population of New York City? Like,
Yeah, millions of people. I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, and like, yeah, and I was rooting for Yang too in that race. And there's a lot of. Have you looked at all the corruption that's going on in New York with the
Yeah.
with Mayor Adams. I mean, this just New York in general seems to have a lot of corruption scandals.
I was not surprised at all just because I followed that campaign pretty closely. I mean, it was even like little things like I believe like, Eric Adams at the time, he would have his cars double parked in place. I mean, that just to me the type of thing that's ultimately snubbing your nose at people and saying, yeah, I can do whatever I want. I mean, the crazy thing was Eric Adams' own police union did not endorse him. They endorsed Andrew Yang for president. Excuse me, for a mayor. And so that and also too, the Andrew Yang had the support of the firefighters. So I mean, ultimately, the people of New York decided they went with, now Mayor Eric Adams. So that was their choice. But it was fascinating, William, just to be able to speak with New Yorkers. Some of them were receptive. I'll learn more about him. I spoke with a few people that were very angry that I called. And what I learned is just when you get someone angry, you know what? They can end the call anytime. So you just say, thank you for your time. You have a nice day. And then you just go on to the next call. So
Yes.
and actually let me actually ask you because I believe for Massachusetts recently, right, we had those five ballot questions. Question four, I believe that you were doing either legislation for or education around. What's been your
Yes.
experience in general, just kind of volunteering and getting involved in the issues you care about?
I really, well, for question four, I was calling people and I had a lot of positive reception.
Hmm.
But then I also had some people who were undecided, and I explained to them how the program would work, it, how there's safeguards to make sure that, like, psychedelics weren't going to be sold at like your local convenience store. And I explained what the safeguards were and how the program would work. And they said, okay, thank you for telling me about this.
Yeah.
Um, so that's why I was disappointed and surprised that it didn't pass. I think the reason why it didn't pass is people. I mean, mushrooms are kind of undergoing a renaissance right now, like
Hmm.
similar to what cannabis went through the past couple decades, where people are realizing how much medicinal value there is.
Yeah.
Um, so, like mushrooms are really being like liberated, and their liberation is helping so many people. But I think the other psychedelics such as DMT, mescaline, and ibogaine, those three are still very unknown to people. So like I'm
Hmm.
sure there's a lot of people who were like yes to mushrooms but didn't know enough about the other three to vote for their legalization.
Yeah.
um but once again, you just got to keep getting the word out to people and sharing personal stories. Like I feel like people will see that the mushroom that there's several nations that have nationwide psilocybin mushroom programs that are working. I mean, Oregon has a mushroom medical mushroom program up and running. Colorado, they passed an initiative that Massachusetts voters rejected back in 2022. In their initiative, they legalized all the five psychedelics, legalized home grow and possession, and then in this upcoming year in 2025, they're going to have the healing centers open up, where all five of these psychedelics will be available. I think Colorado will further prove
Mm.
um, that this works. And I think I talked to some people on the campaign. They think one of the top reasons was everyone was like, even the opposition, the people who were opposing the initiative, even they admitted that, like, yes, these psychedelics are sufficient mental health therapies. They were criticizing the regulation of it. Like, they thought it would be too easy for someone who didn't meet the qualifying mental condition to be able to access it. So I think we just we need to further explain the regulations more to people.
Yeah.
Um, but that's not going to stop um, a lot of. I mean, 7 cities in Massachusetts have decriminalized all psychedelics, and I really feel like if you study like Massachusetts law enforcement, I feel like the war on drugs is over in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been studying like in Cambridge, for example. I was reading a story about homeless encampments, and homeless people using like heroin and fentanyl. And they said toward the end of the article, police are directing these people to treatment services. So it's not like the the uh, the old days, where the draconian drug laws were having police arrest these folks.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, now, especially just kind of talking about what you're saying, about the mushrooms, the therapeutic properties. And, to me, that sounds like that was a great, like, area of learning. To your point, is that just maybe people need more education about how is the bill structured, or if it comes up, maybe are there things that, can really be made, let's say, to even kind of make them available, let's say, for people who need them, like I'm thinking veterans with PTSD. And it's just I just the reason why I'm kind of pausing just now, I find it really interesting because it sounds like what you and the people on the campaign, you guys were really doing a service, because that was the same approach I took with Senator Tester and those calls. So it was funny, because the script said, I'm supposed to call, William, I'm Ben Monat with the John Tester campaign. John Tester is a seven-finger dirt farmer in Montana, and he's going out for your vote. Does he have your vote? It's like, wait, what did I just hear? A sales pitch? I'm like, my approach was, William, it's Ben Monat. Great to speak with you. How are you doing today? Let's say you say, okay, I'm doing fine. Then the question I would always ask is, said, did I reach you at a good time? Because sometimes what I even found is that people would say, you know what, it's not a good time, but I do appreciate your call. So to say, wow, thank you for having that respect of my time. But the beautiful thing is that they said it's a good time. I knew I at least have about 5 of their minutes. And then from there, I would say, I'm calling with the Senator Tester campaign. Do you have any questions about the senator I could answer for you? So just like you did, I try to take that educational approach. And if they said, no, I don't have any questions, I said, well, what are some of the issues most important to you? And then let's say they would say it was immigration, or it was healthcare, or it was gun reform, gun control, or lack thereof, to be able to have an educated conversation. And sometimes I would say, you know what? That's a great question. I don't have an answer for that. Here's, johntester.com slash or .gov slash issues. But just to have that personal one-on-one conversation. I'm a person, you're a person. We both live in this country. We want the best. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, like I also pointed people, like I said, I left a lot of voicemails, and I said, if you want more information, here's our massformentalhealthoptions.com.
Right.
And did you get any people who said I'm voting for Tim Sheehy?
Oh,
That,
oh yeah, yeah. One of my favorite ones. So essentially, Tim Sheehy, there's a lot of questionable things kind of in his past that, the veracity of his claims are questioned. But one guy, said, I'm calling with Tester for a campaign. He goes, oh, I'm voting for Shady Sheehy. So, I thought it was actually kind of a humorous way to get me off the phone. But, yeah, sometimes I'd people say F the Democrats and all that other fun stuff. Again, I'd said, okay, have a nice day. I'd hang up, go on to the next call. But I always remember there's this one great conversation with this gentleman. His name was Mike. I'd actually, the person I was supposed to be reaching out to was his wife. I guess his wife was kind of out in their yard. So I didn't even have his name, but we made a connection. He's like, I got a few minutes to talk. And, I said, what are some of the issues important to you? He goes, well, frankly, Ben, I am a Republican. I do vote Republican down ballot. However, the fact that Tim Sheehy has bought up 37,000 acres of land in Montana. He wants to privatize it. He wants to take the national land there and turn it to the states, which usually translate into 50% of that going to private landowners. So, so he's like, yeah, it doesn't sit right with me. I said, I agree with you. And he's like, what are some of the other issues? I said, well, Tester's gotten a lot of support for policemen, firefighters, and he's also made Montana a tech hub, one of the 12 tech hubs, to get significant funding. So Mike was like, you know what? Thank you for that. He's like, I'm going to sit down with my wife tonight, and we're going to look into Senator Tester and more of his viewpoints. Said, hey, thank you so much. Have a wonderful night. And to me, it was making that connection that I probably don't, see eye to eye with this gentleman on the most of the issues, but we could find a little common ground with, Senator Tester. That really motivated me, and, made, some of those calls where they didn't go as smoothly all the more worthwhile.
yeah, and I mean, it also, like, I feel like voters, the American electorate agrees a lot more with liberal positions than conservative positions, or really the stuff that the Democrats are campaigning on compared to the Republicans, what the Republicans are campaigning on. But one of the reasons why Republicans keep doing better than expected is because they they're very specific on who's getting funding. Like, for
Mm-hmm.
example, Marco Rubio, who's been elected to 3 terms down in the Senate. I mean, he's I know he's worked for like people who go through the legal channels to immigrate here, like, and he's worked with them to get citizenship. And so like once if you're someone who came over here from Cuba and you had difficulty getting your citizenship, but Marco Rubio helped you, like,
Mm-hmm.
even if you disagree with Marco Rubio 90% of the other time, like, it's very, those people are still going to vote for Rubio because of what Rubio did.
Yeah.
I mean, we had for 40 years, from 1980 to 1920, there was a state house seat next to mine here in Massachusetts. So I'm in Mansfield, Foxborough, Norton. This one's like Mansfield, North Attleboro, and Attleboro, I believe. And for 40 years, it was held by a Republican, and it was the Republican was actually like, anti-choice. She was anti-gay marriage back in 2006,
Mm.
like, and stuff. But she kept winning, and it was hard to understand why. And a lot of it was because she was always bringing funding for her district. Like, people disagreed with her on abortion and on gay marriage, but they voted for her because she kept bringing in funding for the district.
You know what's really interesting? No, thanks for sharing that. That's good to know. So President Biden called out by name Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, and Thomas Massey because he had great bills, the Build Back Better bills, that were gonna give them all funding. However, it was not politically popular for them to vote that funding in. So they all reached out to President Biden to say, can we please have the funding for our areas? And I think kudos to President Biden. One thing I've been critical of President Biden on is some of the communications I thought could be a little more direct, kind of addressing certain things that have been going on. But he got up there on the bully pulpit, said, here's a name of 3 people that vote down all of our legislation, but then they love calling me up and saying, can I please have some money for my district? So it's really interesting, William. I think that you really hit the nail on the head when it comes to, what do people see and what's that connection in their mind saying, you know what, I might disagree with them on certain issues, but because they're able to do this, get the funding in your example, they keep on getting voted in. That's interesting.
Yeah, so I think like um and that's why I feel like if Democrats want to win back the presidency in 2028 or win back the House and the Senate in 2026, they got to adopt a present day version of what Howard Dean did back in 2005, or a 50-state strategy. Like,
Yes.
and it's a big. I mean, Reagan said the Republicans were a big tent party. Like, I think every like a Democrat in like rural Pennsylvania is going to be very different than a Democrat in Boston.
Yep. That's what
Um,
that's what confounded me so much about this election because, we had people like Dick and Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney voted with Donald Trump 92% of the time. And then we had people like Bernie Sanders and AOC who were also just as passionate about, Biden, Kamala, and actually some of the progressives. They were really the one when people like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but people like, Nancy Pelosi, President Obama, others were saying, hey, we need change. They were the ones saying, no, we really need Biden, to continue to be our nominee and president. So,
yeah, I mean, it's like I've let's talk about more phone banking that you did. So you talked a lot about your experience calling Montana voters, and actually before we talk about, I want to hear how campaigning for Jackie Rosen went, but I think that's a problem too. Whereas like the vast majority of farmers and like people living in the country, they love public land and they don't want to see their land bought out by private companies. But then they argue like, well, these private companies could like start drilling for oil and mining for minerals and stuff, and it'll employ people. But um, really, like we got to if we keep it at the public. I mean, first off, you got to keep some land eligible for held by the public.
Yep.
But like it'd be better if like the small businesses, like the non-corporate gas stations, it'd be better if they had access to these lands, rather than like you know than like BP oil.
Right.
I
Oh
think
yeah.
that's another thing, or like for getting like minerals, for example, like it would be better if like Barrick Gold, for example. I've been looking at them on the stock market. Like their stock price right now is only like $22. Like
Mhm.
it'd be better if they had access to like these to any land that's going to be developed or any land that's going to be drilled on. It should be the smaller guys because the bigger guys already have enough land.
Oh yeah, I think that's a great policy. I agree with that. One thing I think that the Republicans have done a great job with is their marketing. So the Clear Skies initiatives from I think the 1990s sounds like great for the environment. No, all about like drilling and oil and stuff like that. They call it the Clear Skies or Clean Skies Initiative. When I think doing the phone banking was such a great opportunity to kind of cut through a lot of the noise with, some, things people read or with media. Now, granted, there's definitely some people out there where they had their mind made up. They wanted to kind of be part of the tribe, right? They wanted to be, okay, I'm voting for person X, let's say. But I just really think, one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give to someone if they're interested in phone banking, if I may, it's a few pieces of advice. The first is find a candidate that closely aligns with your beliefs because then when you're making calls, you're going to be excited to pick up the phone and call them. I think, secondly, is give yourself grace to mess up. Give yourself some chance to have some awkward, stumbling over conversations. But I think as long as, if they say, hey, I need to go, or, this isn't a good time, just be respectful and showing that respect, even if you trip over your words, they're going to say, you know what, fine, I understand. They're a volunteer. I think the third thing is self care. Because one thing to know is these campaigns, they're fantastic and they wanted to get as many people to come out and volunteer. But it's important to say, you know what? I had a busy week. I'm sorry. I cannot phone bank this week or I can't do it today. So I think realizing it's a marathon, not a sprint, or those are some ways that I've been able to kind of rack up some of the phone bank sessions because I give myself time to succeed and not feel pressured.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about Nevada.
Mhm.
So yeah, I know so like you started out 2-0 with Warnock and Ossoff.
Yep.
Then you fall to 2-2 with Yang and Tester. But then the tiebreaker, Rosen held on. And
Yep.
so she won Nevada. At the same time, Nevada became the only state that both Clinton and Biden won that Trump won in
Yeah.
2024. So what do you think Rosen was doing that Harris wasn't?
So interesting. Yeah. So let's kind of drill down about Nevada. I have to tell you, I had more positive conversations overall. I felt like people in Montana where Tester lost than in Nevada where Rosen won. But if I had to chalk it up to a few things, number one, she is, I believe, the past, I think 3 years, she's been rated as a top 10 bipartisan senator, with that number increasing. She's gotten all the way up to number six most bipartisan senator. She has a really interesting background, William. So she was a synagogue president, and she was also a computer programmer. And along with Tester, she actually made Nevada one of the 12 tech hubs in the country for technology development. So she was able to bring in, like you said, that funding to Nevada. I also think, too, that she was decently visible that, she would be, for example, like, when President Harris would come and speak, she would be right there with President Harris. Whereas people like Senator Tester, Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio, they try to separate themselves from the campaign. And and I have to say is, I think there's kind of people like to see their kind of senators, don't have to agree with the party, but kind of, agreeing with them in some ways. Because here's another thing about Nevada too, is that I believe when it came down to things like immigration, is that Senator Rosen fought the Biden administration to, I believe, make early on more stricter immigration reform policies because she was listening to her constituents. So that's what kind of what I noticed is she really kind of showed the people of Nevada she had their best interest in mind. She wasn't afraid to push back. But just then also too, to your point, she got some of the great funding and was willing to work across the aisle with fellow Republican senators on issues.
Oh yeah, and I mean it's also interesting in Nevada how I was following their uh, their elections closely because it's 3 out of 4 of their House reps
Yes.
um, were reelected,
Yes.
albeit narrowly. Um, but even in the district in Nevada District 2, which where Republican won, that's where Reno's located. Like the two liberal strongholds are Las Vegas and Reno. So like, I think that this perhaps all the Democrats could win all 4 Nevada House races in 2026, but um, the Senate, Jackie Rosen won by 1.7 percentage points, and she won by a total of approximately 24,000 votes.
Yeah.
Um, Harris Harris actually got more total votes than Rosen did. So it means people voted at the presidential level but skipped over the Senate race. That's another interesting dynamic to study in American politics.
Yeah.
But Trump got a total of 50.6% of the vote with 751,205 votes, whereas Harris got only 47.5% with 705,197 votes. So, and also, before I talk about the ballot initiatives in Nevada, I still don't think that this is an indication that America is turning anti-immigrant. I think we're, I still think we're pro-immigrant. It's just the reason why Trump won on the immigration issue is he's saying that there's just too many people in here right now. Like there's, but and I feel like Harris, I mean, early on in the administration, Harris even said to people in El Salvador, like, do not come, like, we're full, but like people are still coming.
Yeah.
And now here's what I think this is why I still think the Biden administration is better on immigration than the Trump administration. First off, Biden never separated parents and their children at the border. Dr. Jill Biden actually did everything. She ran an initiative to reunite those people who were separated. I mean, keep in mind, I mean, the internment camps in World War II for the Japanese, that's been ruled that was uncalled for, and by the late 80s, early 90s, we made reparations to people who were and families who got put in that, but they never separated. They even in that cruel treatment of Japanese people, they didn't separate parents from their kids. So Biden did not do that. There were a lot of border crossings during the administration, but toward the end of the administration, they really cracked down by putting the border patrol. Like they have the border patrol has been hard at work even under the Biden administration. But they also, one argument is like in Texas, like South Texas, for example, which has been voting Democrat for like 100 years. There's also, they call themselves the Texicans. They're half Texan, half Mexican. A lot of those people, Texicans, voted for Trump because they're saying like there's just too many. Like we're here, but we don't want more people to come. Like it's getting overpopulated. But the Biden administration actually worked out a deal with the Mexico's government. So Mexico had a president from 2018 to 2024. Now they have a new a female president. And they've worked out a deal where they're trying to get people that are, because keep in mind, Mexicans make up a very are only make up a percentage of people coming to our border. Like the vast majority of people coming to our border are from elsewhere in Latin America, but you also got Chinese people, Chinese, Indians, Ukrainians, like people from all over the world are actually coming over to the Western Hemisphere and then trying to come up to America. But Biden worked out a deal with the Mexican government that said, if you can keep a lot of these people who are coming to trying to cross our border, if you can work out a deal where you can keep them legally in your nation in Mexico, like that actually would benefit you because like Mexico actually has Mexico is actually has a rising economy. I've heard that later on this century, a lot of experts predict Mexico might actually challenge the United States for supremacy over the
Okay.
Western Hemisphere.
No,
Yeah, so it's like Mexico actually, so it actually would benefit Mexico if more people chose to stay in Mexico rather than try to come across our border. And it was a really good, like both sides agreed upon it. And I mean, it's, but like now though, with Trump coming back into, like, I feel like that this policy of staying and flourishing in Mexico is just still so young. Like, not enough people who voted for Trump because he wanted to fix immigration can see the benefits of this policy yet. But now they voted for Trump, and now Trump is already saying he wants to put a 25% tariff on Mexican goods, which is going to make everything for Mexico more expensive. His conduct is making the Mexican president want to put tariffs on American goods, which is going to hurt American businesses.
yep.
And it's like he's already, he's already tearing down the relationship that Biden built with Mexico.
Yep. And I think too, one thing is, two names of people in Congress who I am particularly not a fan of how they vote. Dan Crenshaw from Texas, James Langford from Oklahoma, worked to author a bipartisan border bill, would be the strongest of its type. It was endorsed by the Border Patrol Union. That was going to drastically cut down the numbers, really make it a lot tougher for people to cross over. And what Donald Trump did is he called Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, essentially said this would benefit Biden. He did not want to solve the issues about 9, 10 months ago, and he said, "You guys need to kill the bill. Do not even bring it up for a vote." And here's the thing: is that President Biden spoke about it in his 2024 State of the Union address, and the camera panned over to Senator Langford when President Biden said, Senator Langford, you're one of the most conservative Republicans in the Senate. And he said, you wanted this bill to go through, but Donald Trump killed the bill. And you saw it Langford mouth, that's true. So I also think too, people say, well, you know what? How about you do it through executive order? They should have done that earlier. President Biden being in the Senate since 1972 to 2008, and then is, VP for Obama from '08 to 16, that he understood is when you can make something into law, that is going to be on the books, and that is going to really help to achieve America's goals of immigration, sure, making sure people get in the proper way, but also stem the tide. And so I think that's one thing, that was tough because I think the Harris campaign did a great job of consistently speaking about that at rallies and in messaging. But I also think, too, there's this whole thing of kind of macho politics where, Donald Trump, he's taken a lot of tactics from the WWE. Worldwide Wrestling, the personas, the braggadocious, smack talk and all that other stuff. Like, it's actually been funny. Like, I've been watching a lot of the 1990s and 1980s wrestling, Royal Rumbles and, some of the interviews. And you can really point to what President-elect Trump says. It's really rooted in WWE. So I think because he kind of has that, macho-ness, which I don't think he's a macho man at all, but that's a persona I think Americans have bought into. They don't really care that he killed a bill. They're like, oh, it's just going to be much tougher under President Trump. That's my perception. I don't know if you agree or you see it differently.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, I mean, it further adds to Trump's maniac persona. But I just read the Outlier about Jimmy Carter's presidency,
Sure.
and Ronald Reagan. There's some evidence that the Reagan campaign actually was trying to make it so that Carter would not succeed in getting the Iranian hostages freed,
Oh
because
yeah.
because then he would look like a hero and it could boost him to
Yep.
uh elect to victory. Like, and perhaps, I mean, that whole, all those Americans who were taken prisoner in Iran, that really played a role in dragging Carter's reelection chances down.
Yep.
But in the end, though, he succeeded. That was not until the lame duck period. But and on Carter's last day, he got all of them freed.
Yep.
But I feel like it's also similar to how, I think, if you look at the situation in Gaza and in the
Yep.
West Bank, um, Harris called for a ceasefire, but I think
Yep.
she and Biden should have gone a lot further. And I think at this point there should be no more weapon sales to Israel.
Agreed.
I
Agreed. When I lived in Israel for a year, I've been to Israel 4 times. I have a love the state of Israel, but I firmly believe if you love something, you need to be willing to criticize it. And
Yes.
I'll tell you this too. I got together with progressive cousins I have in Virginia. This was in 2023 before the war broke out. We were all saying that, Prime Minister Netanyahu was destroying Israel from within with the reform he was doing with the Supreme Court. And what's actually interesting is that one of the people for his cabinet, when the war broke open, she apologized and she said, "You know what? We have caused Israel to be so destabilized that because of that, we were able to be attacked. And I apologize to the Israeli people for it." And we've been seeing these massive national strikes. People do essential workers. People are not fans of Netanyahu, just like I believe in this country have a lot of people not fans of Trump. But you know what? I totally agree with you. I want to see weapons stopped. I think that there needs to be a serious a ceasefire. Because look, I mean, we both know what happened on October 7th, 2023. It's absolutely atrocious. But there's also a proportionate response. And what's interesting, I found, is that someone who was in the Marines, who was a Republican Senate candidate for Massachusetts, John E. Deaton, I was reading his website, and he's Republican, typically be like, oh, all supports Israel. He says, look, you have rules of engagement in warfare, and he's like, I do not believe Israel has been following those rules of engagement.
No, they definitely haven't.
Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, their strikes have killed way too many innocent people, and they've killed aid workers. They've killed members of the Lebanon army.
Yep.
I mean, it's like they really they already have the Iron Dome thanks to the Obama administration,
Yes.
and they already have. I mean, if you look at, like, we've seen some previews of what a direct war between Israel and Iran would look like. If you look at what the damage Israel was able to inflict on Iran, they fired all those missiles at Israel and they did nothing.
Yeah.
Like, Israel already has enough to defend itself and go on the offense. I think if they had called, the Biden administration should have said no more weapons, period. And
Yep.
it's like the election's over and they're still voting to give Israel more weapons. I mean, Bernie Sanders led a
Yep.
charge on the Senate floor to block the sale, but he only got 18 other senators to join him.
Yeah, and Bernie Sanders, someone who spent time in 1960s in a kibbutz, which is kind of like, like I don't really think they believe in money there. They more trade goods and stuff like that, look like Star Trek. But he lived in Israel. So it's like, to me also too, like there have been significant people, heads of the IDF, the Mossad, which is their, the kind of secret intelligence agency. Countless people who have been in lots of wars with Palestinians, other, Muslims or Arab nations. They're like, we really need peace with the Palestinians. They go, that is the number one critical, safe, thing that Israel can do to be safe. But I think, unfortunately, is like we've seen, Bibi Netanyahu has had countless corruption and fraud counts levied against him. I think this was last year or 2 years ago. And unfortunately, I think similar to leadership in this country is just trying to get the prime minister seat to be able to not have to go to jail. And what's interesting is the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, that he has co-opted the far right religious wing of Israel politics and promised them the sun, moon, and the stars, so they will consistently make sure that he gets the votes. It's sad, but I have to say, I love Israel, and I want to see significant change happen because as a Jewish person, I don't feel that's right to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, we were bullied a lot throughout our history, but we can't be the bullies. That's unacceptable. So that's my rant. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah. I mean, because it's also it's not just in Gaza. I mean, the West Bank. I mean, before October 7th,
Yep.
there's been tales of not tales actually. They're stories, true accounts of Israeli settlers like attacking,
Yep.
Palestinians who have been living in the West Bank, minding their own business. Like that's not cool.
Unacceptable. I totally agree. Totally agree.
And do you want me to read the senators who voted for Sanders Bernie's bill to stop
Yeah,
the
I'd be curious.
sales?
Yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah, so there are Senators Dick Durbin of Illinois.
Wow. Big Israel supporter. Yep.
Yeah, he's been in there for decades. He's a senior. He was a senior when Obama was a junior senator of Illinois.
Right. Right. Spot on.
Um, Martin Heinrich of New Mexico,
Okay.
Mazie Hirono of Hawaii,
Yep.
Tim Kaine of Virginia. That's a
Yeah, he was a big Israel supporter. Yep.
Yep. Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico,
So yeah.
Ed Markey of Massachusetts.
All right. Yep. Yep.
I love him.
Yep.
Jeff Merkley of Oregon,
Yep.
Chris Murphy of Connecticut,
Yep.
John Ossoff of Georgia, and here's the thing,
Exactly.
he's Jewish and he's up for re-election in 2026. I'm
Yep.
hoping that for the young Georgians who are anti-war, I hope they see that.
Me too. I think that they will. I'm a big fan of Senator Ossoff and his commitment to the issues, watching out for the Peach State. Yep.
All right. Brian Schatz of Hawaii,
Sure.
Jean Shaheen of New Hampshire. She's a big. She's been on the Armed Services Committee, so that's another big one. Tina Smith of Minnesota,
Yep.
Chris Van Hollen of Maryland,
Yep.
Reverend Raphael Warnock of Georgia,
Like it. Yep.
Elizabeth Warren,
Yep.
Peter Welch of Vermont,
Okay.
George Helmy of New Jersey. George Helmy's a interim senator after Bob Menendez got convicted of crimes and resigned.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, yeah, that's a whole another thing to talk about. But Angus King of Maine
Yep.
and Sanders voted in favor of at least one of the three bills that Sanders was proposing to stop the sale. And then Senator Tammy Baldwin voted present. So she didn't outright vote no, she voted present. But that
Yeah.
just shows you how, like, even among the Democrats, there's 51 Democrats in the Senate right now at this moment, but 32 of them are voting to arm Israel.
Yeah. 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 There's been a lot of pain in that part of the world. Unfortunately, I think there's going to be more pain, and I do think when people look back on Biden's legacy, he's always been a big supporter of Israel. But actually, something circling back to the John Kerry autobiography. When he was Secretary of State in President Obama's second term, he spoke about working with Netanyahu, and the words he described was, and he's had a decades-long history with him, is consistently moving the goalposts for deals and for peace. And once I read that, that was, I was like, wow, okay, so here's someone genuinely trying to make people's lives better, trying to work, and the compromise, right? Everyone feels a little bit of pain. But at some point, I think, Senator Kerry or Secretary of State Kerry says, are you actually serious about making a deal? We have to get real here. So, absolutely. No, I think that that's well said. And, my hope for Israel is that we can have enough great people like yourself, like these senators, and maybe even people that want to send arms. But you know what? Can we be like, hey, you know what? Let's call it for what it is. Never should anyone be a bully, and anyone has the right to defend themselves, but you can't use that defense and launch an all-out war with indiscriminate bombing and completely become the aggressor. So,
Right. And then it's just it's sad it took all the way until after the election for the Biden administration to work out a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. But even that ceasefire is not like they're still exchanging fire,
yeah.
not as hard at core as they were before, but they're still, and it's that only lasts for 60 days. There's a lot of people that believe Netanyahu's going to start firing again
Oh
after
yeah.
60 days, and then he's working. They're close to working out a deal in Gaza. You know, working with Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and I saw this one of Biden's posts on X. He said where part of this deal entails Hamas not being a governing force
Yeah, that's right.
anymore. But um, it's just like I'm worried that some people like in for like the young people in Michigan who and Michigan has a sizable Arab American population. I'm worried that that if they defected from Harris or if they actually voted for Trump, thinking that Trump could make a deal. I mean, if you look at who Trump has picked in his cabinet,
Yeah.
I mean, he picked. Did you see he picked Mike Huckabee to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel?
Oh, I did not see that. I saw some of the others, not Mike Huckabee.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, this is a guy. Mike Huckabee has said there's no such thing as a Palestinian. He
Yep.
thinks I'm worried that like with Trump and Bibi, like they might even work together to try to take back Gaza and the West Bank for Israel. But
Bibby
I'm
Yeah, Bibi was meeting with Trump when he came over to, meet with Biden and Harris. Yeah, he went down to Mar-a-Lago, and I think that was the whole thing. I mean, to me, it's like I could actually kind of see. I know this might sound nuts. It's, we're at November 24, but I could see U.S., Israel, Russia, and frankly, I think even China. I think all the heads of state there, same with Hungary, they very much have the same world order approach. They want to be the heads of state, and that was actually one thing. Just to bring it back to the phone banking that I kind of felt at peace with because I'm like, you know what? I felt like I did my part for democracy. And, people in this country are free to make whatever decision they want. It sounds like they overwhelmingly wanted Republicans in the House, Senate, presidency, and through that, I would, be so bold to call it a Republican Supreme Court where you had three justices being like, "Oh, we're not going to overturn Roe v. Wade. That's completely safe." In their Senate interviews, and then that gets overturned. So clearly, people of this country have spoken. And I think we'll have to see. I mean, like President Trump said to a group of Catholics, he said, "Hey, I'm going to have this fixed so good where you just vote me in this one time, you're never going to have to go out and vote again." Did you see that interview? Yeah, you're shaking your head. Yep.
well, that's scary too because I feel like he's going to try to argue that he'll be able to run again in 2028. Like he'll argue, oh no, the two term limits requires to presidents who have been elected back to back terms. It doesn't apply to
Yep.
have you been elected to non consecutive terms. But I feel like you know I hope I've been thinking of some proposals and some stuff the Trump administration could do with
Mm.
still being Trump, but like that could still work or benefit America and the world. But like so far though, I'm from how he's talking to Canada and Mexico when he wants to throw these tariffs um, on them and stuff. Like I'm not seeing it yet.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. And actually, if I could, do you mind if I get on my soapbox for a quick second, just as a warning to some of your viewers, with kind of what's going to happen, I think, with the Trump presidency? This is monetarily.
Yep.
Earlier in the conversation, I mentioned I've been interested in cryptocurrency and blockchain. What is going to happen, you're going to see, is my prediction is about over the next year, it's going to spike. Bitcoin's going to go crazy. People are going to see it all over the place. That whole cryptocurrency segment, it typically, what's happened historically, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, not a financial person, but typically there's this thing called the Bitcoin halving that essentially once every 4 years, they cut the supply of Bitcoin that can be mined in half. So that drives up the demand. And typically, about a year after that happens, historically, you see massive increases. So just, I think with, some of the Trump fever, call it, one of the things you're going to see is there is going to be legislation to make it probably a lot easier to do in this country, which, a full disclosure, I own some. I think there can be some great use cases for environmental causes. But please just be really careful of things you hear in the news, because what goes up will come down. So I hope
Yep.
that was appropriate, but I did just want to share that because I think it involves, yeah, what we're talking about.
I mean, it's like the stock market. I mean, um, like a lot of the stocks shot up when Trump got elected, but I mean, you got to be careful because I mean, um, sometimes like things can like crash very quickly and unexpectedly, and that's how people lose a lot of money.
Well, people, you're right, Will, and I don't know if people remember, there was three significant crashes under Donald J. Trump in his first term.
All right, what were they?
I believe so. I believe it was late 2018. It was. I believe his next one was either 2017 or 2019. It was one of the odd years, but then also, granted with the pandemic, I understand. But here's the thing, and uh, one of the things that kind of irks me about the whole pandemic was, so the way the pandemic prep got started, President George W. Bush was laying awake at night in the White House residence and says, the one thing I don't really know how to protect us against is a pandemic. So, right. So I think it was 2006 or so. He gets a pandemic team. He passes it on to President Obama. President Obama strengthens the pandemic playbook, passes it on to President Trump. President Trump, I believe in 2018 or 2019, one of those years, some to the extent of, I don't think we need this, gets rid of the playbook. So it's like, you had two people put their policies side by side that they're very far apart, but they're like, we need to protect people. So I do think it's like the beginning of the presidency. My prediction, everyone should take this with a grain of salt, is that we're going to see kind of things rise. People are going to be really excited, and there's going to be kind of that unrestrained looseness with finances. And again, I think when things don't have a significant financial foundation, like what you were speaking about, some of the 2017 Trump tax cuts, and really kind of supporting the rich, destabilizing the middle class, for example, by doubling the standard deduction that people could take, on their taxes, things like that, where just I think it makes sense for people. It's great to be excited, but just make sure people are doing their due diligence, especially when it comes to finances, I think over these next few months. So
Yeah. I mean, because I feel like a lot of like not also like social media influencers, like there's a lot of ways people can make revenue like from
yes.
like side hustles, and that's great that we have these options, but some of them are like we can't rely on an economy that's strictly um everyone's trying to build up their own individual profile. I mean,
No.
I'm trying to build my individual profile with my podcast and my raps that I have on SoundCloud, um and like, but it's like we also need government subsidies and government funding in many areas, and I feel like they're using I'm afraid they're going to use the excuse of, well, everyone's making money on their through their social media influence and their cryptocurrency,
No.
and so like therefore we can have a completely privatized economy. But I mean, if you look what happened, that was the mindset in the 1920s,
Yes.
and then in
That's spot
1929.
on. Yep. 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 Have you ever been to the FDR Presidential Library in New York?
I have not, no, but I'd love my wife and I want to go to New York City. We'll stop at the FDR library when we're in New York. We're hoping to go maybe next summer.
Oh, you guys would love it. Yeah, it's in Mount Vernon, getting to learn also about the great work Eleanor did. But yeah, that was the whole thing. My understanding it was Herbert Hoover that came right before FDR. Do I have that correct?
Yep.
So yeah, just like what we were saying is President Hoover was really pushing to privatize everything. For philan he believed in private philanthropy funding things, and we saw what happened is there is the Great Depression in 1929. So just I find that really fascinating. We're give or take 100 years away from that, and it sounds like a lot of those same, those same business practices that, back then we had the Roaring Twenties, and then it's like, hey, you know what? We're just going to completely rely on the private sector. Well, we saw what happened, and so I just hope that perhaps maybe we can, as a country, learn from history with regards to that.
Right. I think we need to learn that both the private sector and um, the public sector need to both exist. They need to coexist, and they can both compete against each other and work together.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. And granted, hey, I fully own the fact that President Harris or VP Harris did not win, but there's a great speech. I think that is a model for just you said the public private partnership. She gave a speech at the Pittsburgh Economic Club maybe about 2 months ago, where she very clearly, in no uncertain terms, laid out how she understands that the government has limitations of what they can do, and there is a need to not only partner with private sector, but remove bureaucracy from the private sector so they can grow and innovate. In turn, that will help out the country. They can work together with the government. So just I would urge people, again, VP Harris did not win, but I think just to kind of how to lay out a really clear economic pathway, I found that very inspiring.
Right. I mean, because another thing is a lot of because I own some stocks. I own 2 shares of Nvidia.
Sure. Yeah,
That's
that's a crazy ride.
yep. I own some stock in um, some smaller robotic companies.
Nice.
Um, and then I'm looking at there's another one like Nvidia is getting pretty big. Like it was worth more than when I bought it for like back in June, but now it's coming back down. But it's still predicted to be like worth like over $1,000 someday. Like it'll be like buying Netflix back in 2006. Um, but there's another I believe it's called AMD or something
Sure.
that's like similar to Nvidia. That's like 100. It's worth like $135 per share right now. But once again, um, it like in like a few years it might be like in the high hundreds. But Harris, I mean, they said Harris has had a lot of good relations with the the tech industry
Yep.
and AI because remember her home state is California. That's where Silicon Valley is.
Yep.
So like those stocks actually would have shot up with her as president. Actually done really well throughout her presidency.
I totally agree. I mean, historically, the stock market goes up under Democrats. It does not go up nearly as much under Republicans. I think I forget from, easily from at least President Reagan, and on that stat holds true. And, one thing too, it's, actually, you want to know a great stock for me has been Waste Management, the trash
Hmm.
company. Because one thing what I try to do when I pick the individual stocks is I do stocks with a dividend. Essentially, they're saying, hey, thank you for owning our stock, here's some free money, and I just use that to buy more stocks. But here's a stock that I dumped was Kellogg back in 2021 because they were doing anti-union abuses there. So I said, I don't want to have any part of this company. And interestingly, we're talking politics. Dan Osborne, who is an independent, he led the workers at Kellogg to fight back and win the union protections. And he had a really close race against, I think her name was Deb Fisher, the incumbent Republican in Kansas was that? I think it was
Nebraska.
Nebraska. Thank you, Nebraska. So that's how I try to do like some corporate social responsibilities. I don't mind making a buck, but I just want the people who work for the company to be treated with respect.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean that's I think another part of Biden's legacy is unions.
Yes.
Um, I mean the fact that he walked the picket line with those automobile strikers in Michigan.
Totally agree.
Um, and I feel like I mean one of the reasons why too much of the wealth is being concentrated toward the top is that union membership has been on the decline
Yeah. Good
in
point.
past decades. But now I feel like um, President Biden really helped ignite um, the popularity of unions once again. And because it's just so difficult, because like if you look at electoral maps of presidential races, like Bill Clinton in 1996 took more than half the American counties in America.
Yeah.
And then Obama took, ever since, like, I mean, like Democrats, I feel like the last president to actually win in rural America, I feel like, was Bill Clinton in 1996.
Yeah.
It's like ever since then, rural America has gotten more and more red, and Democratic presidential candidates have had to rely on just turning out vote in the metropolitan areas.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've had three straight elections now where, you know, rural counties that used to be the backbone of the Democratic Party in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even the 80s and 90s has just turned into Trump country.
You know what's interesting? One of the things I heard on the phone is a lot of people say, and I don't agree with the stance, but they say when the Democrats really embraced being a pro-choice party, that's what stopped them from doing it. They said it was never part of the Democratic platform. And I'm like, I'm thrilled that being pro-choice is part of the Democrat platform. So I'm like, if you want to be, observe religion, you ought to have a bunch of kids. No Democrat is saying don't do that. It's just saying, hey, you know what? We need to respect women, respect their bodies, respect reproductive rights. But that was a consistent theme I heard over the phone, that people who were Democrats for years and they're like, I can't do it. I'm voting for Trump. So I can't understand that mindset. I don't judge it. That's their own, value system. So whatever works for them. But yeah, it was puzzling to me, I have to say.
So that's interesting because ever since the Dobbs decision in 2022, the pretty much all the states have been passing initiatives to enshrine reproductive rights into state law. Like, and a
Right.
lot of red states have as well. I mean, the only states that rejected it were South Dakota, and then in Florida, it didn't hit 60%. It hit in Florida's one of the only states where you have to have 60% of a ballot initiative rather than 50%, which is unfair. But like
Totally.
57% of Floridians voted to enshrine abortion rights into Florida Constitution, but it came up short. It came up short because it needed 60. And then
Yeah.
Nebraska, they passed a law that caps the limit to like 12 weeks and stuff. But besides that, though, like a lot of red states, Kansas, Missouri, um, in Ohio,
Ohio, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they've all enshrined, the right to choose into law. Um, I mean, if you look at like Missouri, have you ever been to Missouri?
I have not. No, I would love to see that part of the country one day.
I went to St. Louis for the Delta Chi convention in 2022.
Nice.
And interesting thing I noticed was the tax on my hotel. The state tax was higher than the city tax. Like,
Wow.
it's
Interesting.
in Missouri, you got St. Louis on one side, Kansas City on the other, and Columbia in the middle. So you got like three, like Orion's belt of like three blue counties, but the rest of the state is gone all red.
Wow, interesting. Yep.
And then Trump won Missouri by 18.4 percentage points.
Hmm.
Um, and then in the Senate, um, Hawley got reelected by 13.8 percentage points. The governor's race, Republican Mike Keogh won by more than 20 points,
Yeah. Wow, pretty popular.
but um, they still they narrowly enshrined a constitutional right to an abortion, and they also, with 57.6%, they raised the minimum wage and required paid sick leave for all employers. So they're
Good.
pro like worker rights, but they're staunchly Republicans.
Yeah, yeah. There it's one thing I remember, about Ohio. This was when they legalized marijuana and also voted for, I think, reproductive rights. is I think I read, someone's on the news goes, no, I'm a conservative, like I'm a Republican, I'll vote for Trump, but it's just like I don't want people telling me what I can and can't do. So it's like I don't want to restrict people's right to marijuana. So he's like, I voted for that. He's like, I'm not going to tell a woman, what she can or can't do. So I voted that in. So it's kind of interesting, I think, kind of how some of these lines, especially I think there is a decent libertarian bent to this country, right? It's just like, hey, you know what, back, hands off. And it's just like, what Kamala Harris used to say on the trail was like, regardless of what your deeply held beliefs are, the government should not be telling a woman what they can or cannot do. I thought that was a great line. It's like, who wants the government telling you, oh, this is what you can or can't do? And that's kind of been interesting, is I think with this recent election that we've seen that a lot of people, I don't know if they want the government to tell them to do what to do, but it's definitely this kind of more really more religious bent where you have what schools in Oklahoma, public schools where they're learning the Bible now. That's part of their public school education. So it's definitely a different direction the country is about to go, and I think we'll have to see what the next few years bring.
Right. And then also though, another thing that I've been seeing is that like state initiatives to increase school choice, where to, like use public dollars to send some kids to private school, failed pretty big.
Interesting.
And
Okay. Yeah.
that's another problem I feel like with schools is that like we're like I'm all for private schools, but we need to bolster public schools so that people aren't wanting to go to private school.
Yeah, I agree. We need to have a strong, kind of like a strong foundation educationally. And then I think, because I went to private schools my whole life, they're like the Jewish private schools and stuff like that. But the thing is just, yeah, I think that, every child deserves to have a good education. And it's like when kids have a good education, they understand what's going on, they know how to be critical, question things, then as a society and as an economy, I think we're going to flourish. So I agree with you. I'm all for strong public schools as well.
Yeah, and I know some states have like I know in Arizona in 2020 they voted to um, put a tax on high income earners that would help pay for more funding for public education. And I was very happy in Massachusetts 2 years ago we passed. We have a flat tax of income tax of 5%, but we raised it to 9% to people making more than like $1 million
Yep.
per year. So, and that's going toward mainly toward our public services, specifically our education.
No, I agree. And it's funny. At first, I was going to vote no, but actually, I dug a little deeper and I found, wait, I said, we're an education economy in Massachusetts. And then it's like, you're right. It's like, so we can all get to work a little easier. The roads are going to be better repaired, better infrastructure, better education. It's like, no, you know what? It's like, hey, maybe one day I'll actually have that type of money, right? I'm like, I would gladly pay a little more to know it's being paid in Massachusetts. What I was really glad to see, and I actually want to see more of, is that we voted, what, 75% voted to audit the legislature.
Yep.
I would like to see higher education be audited. I'm all for higher education. I'm a proud graduate, of higher education. But to me, anything that gets to be too big without oversight is an issue. And I'm sure 99.9% of most higher education in Massachusetts will pass with flying colors. That's great. But just I think that the public needs to see the accountability. So yes, we did vote for all this money to go. Now what's being done with the money? Kind of like with the PPP loans, where we saw like millionaires and multimillionaires getting $1 million PPP loans. Like I love Tom Brady, but he got what, $975,000. It's like, come on, like Tom Brady doesn't need that. He's getting $300 million to announce for 10 years, talk about a sport he loves. So like, my whole point is I love giving the money to the people who need it. I just want to make sure that for these really big organizations, just there's some sort of a paper trail or accountability. I don't think that's, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the factors too of why higher education is getting so expensive is, they've cut funding to universities, but then also some universities are, when they get the money, they're not using it to lower tuition. They're using it to beef up like chancellor salaries and stuff. And that's not, and it's interesting too, because I've heard a lot of even a lot of professors are not getting their fair share of
Yep.
the new money. Um, so
Uh,
it's like you really there are some schools like MIT is making it free for tuition to anyone who comes from a family like under like $700,000, and then the University of Texas system was also had something very similar. But I mean,
I have some good news, by the way, just so you know. University of Massachusetts recently came out, I believe, 75 people make as a household, $75,000 or less get to go tuition free.
that's awesome.
So I'm like, that was a really positive step. I thought it's like, okay, great. These universities and public education, they have the money. That to me, that's really passing it on. So I was really thrilled to hear that. I think is a great example of, and it sounds like what MIT is doing, University of Texas is doing to make sure, to me, education is such a big time allocation, especially for adult learners who have families or obligations. So I'm like, I think if people want to learn more, we should make it as easy as possible for them to do so.
Yes, and that's why free community college, like Massachusetts, just enabled anyone over 25 can go back to a community college for free.
I did not know that. That's
Yep.
fantastic. Really?
Yes.
I didn't know. Wow. I'm gonna have to look that up. That's really fascinating. Wow. That's great. Well, William, this has been such a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me. I always love our conversations. I know we've been kind of talking, over the Facebook Messenger, and just it's so great to be able to see you here and just really get to dive deep into the issues and hear how you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And we actually, this is the fourth podcast episode I've done. We topped 2.5 hours.
It flew by. I mean, just having a great time and like, because I'll tell you, one of the things I love about our conversations is I always come away and I learn something new. And that to me is just it's really insightful. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
honestly, I feel like young people still need to be. There's a lot of young people out there that wouldn't be are not as informed as you are, and as all the stuff you've shared tonight.
Oh, thank you so much.
And that's not to insult them. It's just to say that like they could be informed. They're just not doing enough like not doing enough reading one, but also not reading from enough unbiased sources.
Yeah, and I think one thing, and you tell me if this is applicable, but if I had to guess, it would be yes. I think, sometimes we say, wow, that's great. Like, we don't know that. Let's learn more about it. Who can we ask about it? It's saying, you know what, if you don't know something, that's the start of a journey of learning about it. And that's what's exciting. It's something to be embraced and to really lean into. Because I feel like, in the age of technology, it's a great thing, but perhaps people feel like, oh my gosh, I feel stupid if I don't know something. Like, great example earlier in our conversation tonight, you mentioned the Battle of Valley Forge. I wasn't exactly sure what that was. I'm like, William, would you mind sharing with me more of what that is? You're like, hey, not a problem. Right. I think that's a great example right there where I was willing to be saying, hey, I don't know much about that. And you're like, not a problem. Let me fill you in.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Have you been? Are you a Celtics fan?
I love the Celtics. For me, really, the Patriots are the one main sport. But I will tell you, my grandma, who's 96 years young, she loves watching the Celtics.
Mm.
Yep, yep. She
Oh, so I mean, she's seen every championship they've ever won.
Yeah, so here's the funny thing. No, you're absolutely right. She was born in 1928. So the funny thing is she grew up with my grandfather, in New York, originally from Hartford. They lived a lot of years in New York. So unfortunately, they kind of like some of the questionable teams, the Yankees, some of the other ones. But especially over the last 10, 15 years, I have to say, she gets so excited anytime the Celtics are on TV. She'll even call me, say, hey, Ben, what time are they on tonight? She's like, I want to make sure I catch them. So yeah, and just to end off too. So she's seen a lot. She remembers World War II, and yeah, just she kind of she prays for this country just because she's like I've never seen it look like this before. She's like we've been through a lot. She remembers the Rosenbergs and the whole communism scare. But no, that's just why also too I feel like these conversations are so important because when things get tough, it can be easy I think for people to isolate. I think we need to lean into our friendships and connections and be there for one another and learn from one another too.
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's awesome. Well, hey, just curious if one more question for you is, do you have a little bit of an outlook? We started with the Patriots. Do you mind if we end with the Patriots? I'd love to know kind of what you're seeing for the season and any, needs to address in the off season.
I think we're still rebuilding right now, but I think Drake May is the future. I have to say I stand corrected. I thought it was we weren't going to be ready to put Drake May in this year due to our shaky offensive line.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
he really, I mean, he's adjusting. He's very, first off, he's very cool and calm. Like there's a lot of quarterbacks you can tell who would be in this kind of situation who are very anxious and erratic
Yep.
and stuff. But he's just cool and calm. He's working with what he's got. And then on all the offensive line is like the offensive line's still not solid, but it's gotten better, I think, as the year's gone on.
I agree.
But like May has been able to top like 275 passing yards with like receivers who are not really top tier. So like if we can get him a loaded offense and like and he gains more maturity and experience, I think he could be one of the top quarterbacks in the league.
Yeah.
He's very mobile too. Just see he racked up like 96 rushing yards. I think it was against the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, that was exciting to see. I don't think we've had, I mean, apologies to probably Cam Newton, but I don't think we've really had a mobile Patriots quarterback, maybe ever. I'm not
I
sure.
think probably like us. Was it us? Stan, I always get these two names mixed up, but Steve Grogan.
Rogan,
Steve
yep.
Grogan in the
Early 90s.
70s and the 80s. He was a mobile quarterback. I think I sent a text message to a friend saying Drake May is the most mobile Patriots quarterback since Steve Grogan.
I'll have to go back on YouTube, I think, watch some film of Steve Grogan. Yeah, for some reason I thought he was early 90s, but no, you're absolutely right. He was 70s and 80s. And yeah, that's gotta be fun. I gotta watch some film on that.
Yeah, Grogan actually he took us to the Super Bowl in 1985, and he was also on the 1976 Patriots team that got us to the got us like our first like big winning season, like because and stuff when we went 11-3.
That's
He
cool.
yeah he passed for 26,886 yards.
Wow.
He rushed for 2,176 yards, but like he was he's described as the dual threat quarterback in an era known for pocket passers.
Wow,
And
that's good to know.
so I mean, people say like Michael Vick claims he's like I invented the dual threat, uh, you know, pass. I mean, even though I mean, there's many more mobile quarterbacks that came before him, AKA like Randall Cunningham
Oh,
or and stuff, but like or Warren Moon, but like really Steve Grogan, I would argue is the he invented the dual threat,
wow, that's
or may
cool.
or I'm sure I bet you could find some film of like Johnny Unitas being very mobile and stuff, but really Steve Grogan, he was he's really the unsung quarterback hero for the Patriots. And then I think our defense this year, like we had one good game against Chicago, but if we had the defense last year that we had this year, we'd be more competitive. But I'm hoping the Patriots need to prioritize signing Ramondre Stevenson to a long-term deal.
What do you think about the fumbling? I love his game, but some of the fumbling that kind of got me a little worried. I loved Ramondre Stevenson. I still think he's good, but what do you think about the ball control, all that stuff?
He's got to do what he's got to. I remember when Stephen Ridley was in his prime. His for 4 years from 2011 to 2014. He used to whenever he fumbled, Belichick would make him like hold a football on the sideline. And I think what Stevenson's got to do is he's got to just when he's not at practice, he just has to walk around carrying a football.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you're right. I think you're right. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see a little more of a pass rush for the defense. I think that'd be nice, a little quickness, more getting to some of the quarterbacks. But the one thing I'm being glad to see about Drake May is one stat I'm always big on is time of possession in football games. Because I mean, that was the thing is like I think that's what made those Patriots defenses over the last few years actually really good is like they would be on the field for like 40 to 42 minutes a game just because the offense couldn't really stay on much. So, they didn't have much of a break or anything. And I think the fact that there were so many games where just they give up 10 points or less, I thought that was really remarkable. So yeah, so I think if we can have some sustained drives, I agree. I like what Drake May is bringing, his enthusiasm, being able to be savvy like that dual threat quarterback, and I'm sure he's learning more every week. Just yeah, I don't think we're gonna be at the Super Bowl next year, but hey, you know what? Is my thing is I just want the games to be exciting. If they can be exciting, then I'm a happy fan.
Like if we can put up a fight against the Buffalo, I think we can beat Indianapolis. And if
Well,
we can
like
put up
that.
a fight against like the Buffalo Bills at home, or traveling out to Arizona, or like we have the Chargers second last game of the season. The Chargers are going to be fighting to lock down a playoff spot. Then, like if we could say like, hey, before you get to the playoffs, you have to come through us.
Like that.
Like, yeah, but I mean, uh, like I think we can put up a good fight. It'll be a good like building for tomorrow uh, set of games.
I agree. I agree. That's awesome. Well, hey, William, so great to see you. You have a great night, and hey, hope we can do this again sometime soon.
Yes, definitely. I will. We will stay in touch.
That sounds great.
All right, and I'll let you know when I put this up on my YouTube and all my social media sites.
Sweet. I really appreciate it. Can't wait to listen to it.
Yeah, I always love like listening after making an episode, like listening to it again. And also, before you go, the Celtics are actually up 130 to 124 right now with 54 seconds left. So let's go watch them.
All right, sounds good. You bet.
All right, thanks for coming on. So awesome talking to you.
Hey, absolutely. Hey, my pleasure. Thank you. Thanks. Take care. Bye bye.
You as well.
Thanks.